audience so I can say dumelang. Re gona le kae? It is indeed a great pleasure on behalf of the IEC, particularly the IEC in this province, to welcome all of you to the thought leadership session this morning. We will be discussing women in democracy. In other words, we'll be discussing 28-year-olds. Because as you know, democracy in this country is almost that old. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is very important for us when we come to think, to listen, to reflect, and to learn that what we will be hearing today is living testimony of what we all aspire to. We're going to listen to 5 beautiful women who will inspire us, who will instruct us, and who will give us direction. Therefore, I request you to listen very attentively so that you can relate, because you most certainly will relate. Now, our 4 presenters will be introduced as they come, but those are probably the most important guests today, because they are going to force us, to compel us, to propel us to think, and think very seriously. Now, without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call on Mrs. Zora Suleiman so we can listen to a testimony of giving. Mrs. Suleiman, thank you. Okay. We're moving at a slowly but steady pace towards technology. There we are. Good morning, Mrs. Suleiman. We are more than eager and ready to listen to you. Thank you.
Good morning, Julie and the rest of the audience there in the Eastern Cape. I'm sitting here in my office in Pietermaritzburg, KwaZulu-Natal. It is indeed a pleasure to be joining you, dynamic women. I hope that our thought leadership sharing and contributions will make a meaningful difference to the changes that we want to make and see in our country, especially in the rural areas. So my request was to talk about the effect or impact on women in disasters. So let me start sharing with you. I've made a few points and I'm going to look at them. So I think that women, children and the elderly become the biggest casualty of natural and man-made disasters. And the woman, who is the wife, experiences the death of her spouse, sometimes her children or other loved ones in her family, sometimes a dear friend in the community, the death of the children's father, and girl children the daughters lose their fathers. Being a woman and a mother, she has to immediately step up to play many roles. As it is, she's a natural caregiver, nurturer, and now she has to fill the many gaps as a result of the disasters. So in the case of floods, earthquakes, cyclones, and other such natural disasters, as well as wars of xenophobic nature, there is the issue of becoming displaced from your home, and in extreme cases, even from your country. Overnight, families are forced to accept crowded living conditions in refugee camps. They have to share communal bathrooms and kitchens and communal social areas. Children have to play in the same area. And there's a whole lot of production of waste. As we consume, we also produce the waste. And at these refugee camps, there are no municipal services to come and collect the waste production. And this situation can last months and even years in many countries, as we know, that people are still living in UN refugee camps and other refugee camps. Living under these crowded conditions and in camp situations, they experience the loss of privacy and dignity. And when I say this, it's all families, but I mean, I think women, as women, we try to keep the unit together and to try to give them the semblance of normality, even in an abnormal situation. Families are forced to stay on the space of the size of a mattress. In the Republic of Congo, I even saw that the size of a family had to stay on the size of a normal standard door. This gives rise to infighting, conflict, disturbances due to sharing the common space. There's no privacy for couples. Children witness the parents' intimate behavior. I remember in Syria, there was an article that was written that where they were living in crowded conditions in refugee camps and where couples were having intimate relations at night, and let's face it, that is a natural need like food and air and safety and security. So to satisfy your sexual need is just as important. But then the inmates of these refugee camps were complaining that people were being indecent, disrespectful, and the noises from such activities was disturbing them at night. And also it wasn't good for children to be witnessing all of that. So that just tells you to the level of loss of dignity. What a humiliating situation to be in. It gives rise to infighting, conflict, disturbances due to sharing common space. As I said, no privacy. A rise of domestic violence due to frustration. The woman again has to bear the brunt when they are staying in such crowded, claustrophobic, limited resources, situations and circumstances. And then if the spouse has survived, if it just has been a natural disaster like a flood or something like that where there hasn't been a death, then again the woman has to bear the brunt and the consequences, because then she becomes she gets beaten up, and there's a rise in domestic violence and gender-based violence as well. Another important thing that is experienced, and the impact of natural disasters on women and on the girl child especially, there is the loss of education. When these natural disasters happen, people are immediately displaced and relocated, and they are moved away, further away from their schools, which means that these children can no more attend schools. And of course, half of that population of children that won't be attending schools will be the girl child. So this will just exacerbate the existing problem that we are already having, where girl children are either held back to go to school, or for various reasons there's no school fees, or there's not food or uniform money for uniforms to send the child to school. Now, let's say if the child is in school, but when a disaster like this happens, or war or conflict, then they are moved to a refugee camp, which will be far away from the school, which means then that this girl child cannot access her schooling, and as a result her education, which then interrupts with the education, which interrupts with the empowerment of the girl child, who would have had the opportunity of furthering her education, perhaps at a tertiary institution, having the opportunity of securing a secure job, having the opportunity of being able to earn money and an income and bring it into the family to change the direction of their lives, to improve their lives. But with such situation, the girl child is deprived of such opportunities and her education is disrupted. And the next question was, from a counseling point, which are the areas where women would need guidance when facing the types of disasters? In my experience, access to medical assistance for women and children and the aged is critical. So again, in places like the DRC, the Republic of Congo, we were there in 2012, and there was an ammunition site that exploded. And so a lot of people were moved from their housing village and relocated on other sites. Many of them required medical and physical assistance of a specialized nature, such as a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, neurosurgeon, the services of physiotherapy, and just basic clinic, basic primary health care. We must understand that in circumstances like these, there will always be people who have chronic conditions like hypertension, cardiac conditions, diabetes, and many other chronic conditions. And they need access to clinics as to get their medication. Some of them might have just run from the home, taken barely anything, ran with the clothes on their back. So they haven't taken their medication. In the case of patients with diabetes, it's critical if they are on insulin or on any of the diabetes medication. And so I think in a disaster, the first thing that needs to be considered is access to basic medical care. Then we've got to talk about mental health. In these disasters, you experience grief as a result of loss of your loved ones, your spouse, your children, your friends, your family, your neighborhood, your community. So this is a mass experience of grief, and people experience this as acute stress disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, which, if not dealt with, eventually leads to depression, anxiety, and other chronic mental health conditions. So we need to have access to mental health, to, if we could call it medical first aid, just to contain the people immediately after the disaster, which is the acute intervention phase, just so that we are able to contain them, to allow them to just get by the necessary and the fundamentals of the immediate time past the disaster. Another thing that comes up in disasters, triggered by the disaster, a lot of old issues would come up. So things like childhood traumas of rape, child neglect, child abuse, abandonment, even much later experiences and social conditions, psychological conditions such as maybe betrayal in the marriage. It could be simple issues such as unemployment, food insecurity, poverty, housing. Maybe the permanent housing was not secured, yet it may have been promised by the government of the area. So a lot of old issues come up, contrary to the belief that when we go into disaster areas, we only do trauma counseling. That is merely to hold and contain the space in which we are. But once rapport is built and you engage with these women and children, you realize that the disaster has actually triggered up old and past traumas, which have never been dealt with, and becomes the foreground for therapy and for interventions. Housing and relocation. There's a lot of anger. Often people are not interested in coming in for counseling. When they come to the counseling tent, usually they are very disgruntled and angry, and they're complaining about promises that were unmet, perhaps food hampers that were supposed to have been delivered but were not delivered to them. Housing, probably rebuilt or temporary housing facilities. And you would also find that people get very angry because they were in the queue and they found that other people that might not have been affected by the disaster have come in for secondary gain to benefit from the services of the disaster. And so you get a lot of people that are very disgruntled because of unfair distribution, because of people cutting the line, and of unmet promises. Another very important issue to consider is prostitution for money, to buy food. And so sometimes when the husband may have died in the disaster, and the woman is left on her own, and there are large refugee camps, or they are just displaced because of a natural disaster like flood or hurricane or a fire or a cyclone, and sometimes family members are lost and they cannot find each other. And if women are left with their children, they often have to resort to prostitution just to get some money to buy food for themselves and for their children. And it shows the level that our women have to stoop to just so that they are able to feed their families and buy the basic essentials. Another thing that I found in disasters that affects girls are sugar daddies. So again, in our experience, in our work, we have found that men would come around to these refugee camps, and they would come in their Porsche vehicles, well dressed and groomed, and they would stand at a certain point outside the camp and lure these young girls into coming to them and offering them money. And young girls like things like doing their hair, they like using makeup, doing their nails, lots of body items and products. And these sugar daddies would lure them and offer them and tempt them with these attractive items that girls will if I could say, submit to, and then they become victims of sugar daddies, and eventually they even get abused in some of these situations. Sometimes this can lead to child trafficking, human trafficking, where they are then transported to other places, other countries, and used in prostitution houses. So these are the impacts, and I would say the far-reaching impacts of the way that women are impacted in disasters. And the next question was, what input would be relevant from the perspective of the IEC as an organization. And I would recommend, firstly, advocacy. Advocacy for safe and secure housing. A lot of these houses are housing villages are placed on riverbanks or at the foot of the mountain. And that makes them more vulnerable and susceptible to floods, heavy rainfalls, fires, heavy windstorms, hurricanes, and such type of disasters. So there needs to be a rethought about where these housing villages are developed and established. Housing near schools and clinics and basic infrastructure and shopping centers, access to roads and public transport. Often when women are impacted by disaster, the relocation takes them away from what was an amenable infrastructure for them. And with the relocation, which, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes even takes years, they are cut off. They are cut off from basic amenities and infrastructure. So I think that is something that we need to put on our list, that when we relocate people, instead of cutting them off, rather to relocate them to places where there are basic amenities and services. We need to make, these relocations, or even generally when we are in the positions of influence of where developments are taking place and communities are rehoused because of the makeshift housing that they are using, and if the government is moving them to permanent housing villages, I think we need to consider these above points that I've just considered. And I think important is the accessibility to clinics for primary health care. There are the elderly, women, young girls, children, all of them need to go to clinics, and for their special conditions, whether it is pregnancy, whether it is baby care, whether it is chronic medication for chronic conditions like hypertension, HIV, TB, diabetes, and so on. So there must be access to clinics and primary health care facilities, even if these have to be on in a mobile form. The other important services that need to be accessible is mental health care. Without disasters, we are heavily short on mental health support services. Importance. I think another very important thing that we can do, and the IEC can do in their strategic and influential position, is to destigmatize mental health. There are still beliefs that when we experience certain conditions, these are because our ancestors are very unhappy with us, or we have done something to anger them, and so this is why we are being punished or suffering the consequences. So I think education around symptoms of grief, PTSD, depression, all of these things, there needs to be education, especially in disasters. Often there's a language barrier. So we need to make this information available in poster form and pamphlet form, using lots of graphics and pictures, and using the language of the population that we are working with and the population that's affected, so that they can look at these pictures and the graphics from there, and understand that what they are experiencing is not actually a consequence or the anger of the ancestors, but rather a symptom of the disaster that they have just experienced. We also have to educate them on the nature of, on the importance of seeking mental health services. And I think this is where our rural sisters and mothers are in a way excluded, because most of the advertising and campaigning is usually done for services that are available in urban areas. So we need to make information and ways of how to access such services available to our mothers and sisters and daughters in the rural areas. GBV, another big issue. In disasters, GBV gets exacerbated. We know that during the COVID pandemic, GBV had increased exponentially. And it has even been called the shadow pandemic or the undeclared state of emergency by our President Cyril Ramaphosa. Studies have indicated that we are the highest level of GBV cases, which is tantamount to femicide in other parts of the world. So education about what GBV is. Often people think that if there is no physical abuse, then it is not gender-based violence. They need to understand that abuse comes in the form of mental, verbal, emotional, psychological, and I'll even add spiritual abuse. So often our religious leaders or our patriarchal male society will impose systems and practices on us that are oppressive to women. We need to educate about services, helplines, how to access these services, even if it means we've got to go on regular road shows. We need to remove the barriers to access of these services. And as I mentioned earlier, that our rural sisters, mothers, daughters are unaware. So we need to inform, educate, and make them aware. That's what I have to say for now. Thank you very much.
And questions that you'd like to share with our presenters as soon as they have all completed their presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 words expressing why we are here today. 2 phrases: women in democracy and thought leadership. Now, this is what we mean by thought leadership. We are very fortunate in this province that we have such a forward-thinking leader in the person of Ms. Magudumane, knowing that this is history being written. This is research, Dr. Rapo, in action. This is what makes our living legends who they are, because they have the experience that we have just shared, the gushing of natural disasters, the torrential rains that were experienced in KwaZulu-Natal in recent months, and the complete loss of dignity, as explained by Mrs. Suleiman. These are the thoughts that brought us here today in the Women's Month, in our 28th year of democracy. What is our relevance? What is it that we're going to do to impact change? How are we going to be known for in our history? We are writing history, and these are the authors of our history, for they have to tell our stories. This is the year of even numbers. From 1956, 66 years later, through 1976 to 2022, all of them even numbers. What does that mean for us and for our democracy? And what is it that we should write when we write our contribution towards democracy? Ladies and gentlemen, can we please give another round of applause to Mrs. Suleiman? Well known as the co-founder of the Gift of the Givers. I really love that name, Gift of the Givers. But now we're seeing her as an author of all of us history today. We are going to now call on Dr. Leslie Ann Foster to come and give us testimony about Masimanyane Women's Support International. Dr. Foster.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be able to make some contribution to this conversation on thought leadership. I've been asked to look at the issue of democracy, the contribution of women to democracy, and linking that to the work that Masimanyane does to address violence against women and girls. I have a presentation, and I'm hoping that it'll come up. But just to start off with, Masimanyane Women's Rights International is an organization rooted in the local realities of women. We call ourselves locally rooted and globally connected. That is because we place the struggles that women have within a global context. And we work with organizations across 12 African countries and across 5 continents to address this issue of violence against women, or gender-based violence as we call it here. We know that it is the greatest challenge facing most of the women in our country at the moment. We're still struggling with it, but I'm going to continue. So I'm calling this presentation The Struggle for Equality and an End to Violence Against Women and Girls, and it's very much about our democratic struggle as well. What you'll remember, of course, because we are in Women's Month and we always talk about this, is the contribution that women made to democracy in our country. Apartheid, of course, was the most heinous system, and women were contributing before 1956 in very small ways. But in 1956, the whole struggle changed because of the input of women. And besides the organizing of the march, the narrative and the discourse changed completely with the liberation struggle because of what women were how they were able to organize and mobilize, which seemed like a grassroots initiative, but it was one of the most powerful political initiatives ever. Okay, can we go to the third slide, please? So I've just captured on the third slide, some of the photographs of that 56 march. Because I think it's something, whatever we're doing today rests on the shoulders of the women in those pictures. They were the thought leaders of the day. And that's important for us to remember. So what are the feminist contributions to democracy? When the women realized that their issues needed to be placed in the center of the struggle, the Women's Coalition, the National Coalition was set up, and women started to campaign. They went from city to city, town to town, village to village, asking women what they wanted to see in a democratic society. And what came out of that was the Women's Charter of Effective Rights. So we learned from our foremothers as well how to organize, how to mobilize, and how to develop thought leadership in the country. Very important contributions to what today is the Bill of Rights and contained in our Constitution. Women are never given power. We always have to fight for it. And that's an important, okay, thanks. That's an important part of our work here. So what happened when the Constitution was being negotiated, in the first discussions, women were left out of that. And they had to fight for that space. They closed down that process and said, until women are in it, it's not going to happen. So I think that's a very important learning for us as well, that we have to fight for the space. That's all about this whole fight and struggle for gender equality. So since then, women have engaged in Parliament with the legal reform that was necessary at that time. And I remember in the first few years, more than 5,000 laws were reviewed to align with the principles of equality and women's human rights. We had our new government then signing into power international instruments like the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. 1996-5, it was the Beijing Platform for Action. And since then, we have seen several developments in this field, all of which is contributing towards our democracy. So what I want to talk about is the modern changes that have come about, and something which is known globally as the fourth wave of feminism. Feminism has changed. The fight for democracy and equality has changed because of the introduction of social media. So we've seen young women particularly taking up the struggle and organizing using social media platforms. We, as the older generation of activists, talk about the closing of political space. And the young people are saying, but there's no closing of space. There's opening up and a widening of spaces because of social media. They can get into more places. And COVID in particular showed us how we could get into spaces that generally would be closed off to us because we wouldn't have access through, the money to fly or to attend meetings and so forth. What we found was that the world was suddenly open because we could use Zoom, and different platforms, which I really get frustrated by, being from the old guard, because every time they come up with something new, it's like, oh my word, I need a whole workshop on this. But this is the reality of young people, that they can actually get into these spaces and work with it. So several space campaigns still are led by younger women, and that's quite an important initiative for us. Some of the things we've seen that I think really bear important reference is the silent university protests, and all of this was focused on violence against women. That was happening in our tertiary institutions and continue to this day. Starting as early as 2006, people were using Facebook, they were using Twitter to talk about this. We now have the Me Too campaign, Say Her Name campaign. All of these are global campaigns that are being used by women, but in South Africa we use that very, very strongly as well. So it's important to be able to see how this, and these were the issues that raised the profile of the struggles that we have. This was a very powerful campaign. I see it here, but it's not coming up. Okay, there we go. So this was also a campaign by young women. Look at how they organized themselves silently, quietly, ending up at the event where the election results were being shared, and then bringing in the whole violence against women question to a global audience for young women. Powerful. Powerful. And the thought process that went into that was massive. We also know with the Fees Must Fall campaign that young women were leading that campaign before they got pushed aside and were overshadowed. But their thought leadership came into that. So this is how young women are bringing this into the political arena. The most powerful, most recent campaign is the Total Shutdown campaign in 2018, when all of us across the country were organized into having protests at a provincial level, at a level of local government. Young women, again, were spearheading this. They came together, they sat down, and they spoke about what their concerns were, and they came up with 24 demands. They took that to the union buildings. The president at first sent somebody to one of the ministers to take the demands, and the women said no. They were organizing themselves all the time and saying, we want the highest political response to these demands because too many women and girl children are being raped, brutally murdered, sexually violated in their workplaces every single day. And we are fed up, absolutely fed up. Enough. We're saying enough is enough, and still nothing happens. So the Total Shutdown campaign repoliticized violence against women by bringing it to the president's attention. And to his, his response, his positive response to this was to give the issue the highest political response it's ever had, to recognize and acknowledge that it is an issue that's facing the country. It's a critical concern, because what does it do? It actually excludes women from political processes. It excludes women from influencing democracy because it isolates them. Violence against women has an incredible lifelong impact on women and girl children, and it needs to be addressed. And he saw that and gave it the greatest political response we can have. We also see that young women still today are doing surveys on Facebook. They're working with that. The Total Shutdown campaign was successful because the strategy was to connect people using Facebook and WhatsApp messages. And it's so amazing that WhatsApp messaging has become such a powerful tool now. Our organization in Ghana that we work with, Agenda Center for Human Rights and Democracy, their groups train using WhatsApp. So they shorten the distance. They make it possible for women in far-flung areas to participate in the training and campaigns using WhatsApp messaging. So that becomes a very important thing. And I think this whole concept of women in the Total Shutdown campaign coming together and working was very, very powerful. So the demands of the Total Shutdown campaign was that they wanted this very strong political commitment. They wanted a declaration on violence against women. They wanted a national council. They wanted a national strategic plan. And all of that were the demands that came through all the marches that took place. So they wanted political change, social change, and economic change. Still no, I'm trying, but it's, yeah, there we go. So then what happened in 2018 was that the president called for a national summit on gender-based violence and femicide. This is such a clear, practical example of democracy in action. The people speak and the state responds. That's the issue about how a thought leadership can influence change at a country level. The summit was attended by 1,200 women. It was very, very powerful because it brought home the full extent, it brought home the depth and the breadth of the struggles that women have. Because gender-based violence is not just a physical violence. It's structural violence, it's interpersonal violence, it's economic violence, and all the other stuff at an interpersonal level like psychological, financial, and so forth. It's all there, and it's social violence. So it's how we're treated by our traditional religious, cultural authorities. It's all of that. It's embedded in that. The gains from that national summit were enormous. We got the National Strategic Plan on Violence Against Women, which is very powerful. It has 6 pillars, and it was powerful because we took the process to every single province to learn from women themselves how they saw this problem manifesting and what they thought were the responses to it. What is very important, and so much the work of Masimanyane is, we don't try to think for other people. We don't try to think for women. We ask women because we understand that women have agency. They have a clear understanding of their problems, their challenges, and they have an understanding of what the solutions to those challenges are. And I think this is very important in having the 9 provincial consultations, we were able to gain an understanding of what was common to all provinces and where the anomalies are. Like in the Eastern Cape, we have in some parts witch burning, we have virginity testing in KwaZulu-Natal. There are different forms of it, and actually being able to address all of that through these 6 pillars. What's happening here today addresses pillar 1, which is accountability, coordination, and leadership. We always have to show leadership, and one of the things that the IEC is responsible for is its leadership in having agenda analysis and agenda strategy to ensure the greater participation of women in democratic principles and processes like the elections. The second is prevention and rebuilding of social cohesion, a very important part of our work. And I think one part of it that we're not grappling with hard enough, because the reality is we have to change the social norms and standards within our society. And that's the hardest thing to do, to change mindsets, to have the status of women raised in our society. The prevention work is the hardest. And I promise you, from where I'm standing, grounded in 26 years of work in gender equality, that's the area that needs the most attention and at the moment is not getting enough. We think of prevention as marches, candlelight services, wearing orange or purple or black, but we don't want to challenge the power and the control at an interpersonal and community level. That's really the hard work we have to do. Justice and safety, we've had many gains on that. And then there's the response care and support, which most organizations are working on. And then the economic pillar, which is trying to get women into work. Another difficult area. And it's difficult because at a structural level, our economic policies are influenced by global forces like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. It's all set internationally and then foisted onto us at a national level. So those things we have to be cognizant of. We're talking about job creation, but are we ever going to get women out of a survivalist level of existence? That's the question we have to ask. You know, is it always going to be chicken farming, you know, pig farming, sewing projects? Because we're never going to have a decent standard of living with that. So there are big questions around how we do this and what does economic empowerment actually mean? Are we trying to prepare women for the 4th industrial revolution? Are we changing the way we educate children in school, and girl children particularly? Do we have a mindset shift on how and what will bring, you know, finance into families and homes? Those are very deep questions. And then, of course, the final question is on research, information, and information management. Now, the reason why I'm sharing the National Strategic Plan pillars with you is because it is a democratic gain for women. And if fully implemented, it'll be a significant gain and a significant contribution to gender equality within our country. Now, Mrs. Suleiman spoke a little bit about COVID from the disaster management perspective. I think that what I'd like to say is that COVID really surfaced the fault lines in our society because it brought the inequality issue up very strongly. The majority of jobs that were lost, which was 2.6 million, was mainly women. 2 women out of every 3 jobs lost. That was the impact. And so many of them have not gained any of that back. Greater care burden and supervision of children at school, food insecurity are gender issues. During COVID, women carried that burden at a greater level than in their normal lives. Being at home, having to see that. And everybody complained about how much food insecurity there was because the children were home, you know, and the demands were greater. So that was very big. The other thing was sexual and reproductive health and rights took a back step. Yesterday I was in a meeting where I heard how, because of the COVID pandemic, the gains made on HIV prevention have been lost. And we're seeing spikes in it in our country and globally as well. So there are significant impediments that have occurred as a result of the COVID pandemic. So the other thing that's really recognized is that women were the first responders to the COVID pandemic. In all struggles, you don't hear that. In all pandemics, you don't hear that. With Ebola, it was the women that were reporting about this illness. And with COVID, women were the first responders. They're the ones taking care of those that are ill and so forth. And so they were setting up food supplies. They were setting up soup kitchens and things like that, and trying, until it became really dangerous, to keep food security taken care of. And so they played a very, very important role. And of course, we all went online using Zoom and Microsoft Teams, which increased access, as I said. And today we can laugh at the challenges we face, but some of us took up to 3 months to learn how to connect to a Zoom meeting. Some of us still struggle. I was in a presidential meeting this morning, and people were saying, we can't connect, we don't know what to do. We still have those problems, so it's really quite, it's challenging and it's exciting because eventually you do learn. But some of us are also limited to how much we actually do want to learn about technology, and I put my hand up first. I hate it every day when I just shouted at one of the president's advisors because she sent me something called Turbo Task or something, and I was like, Sibs, why would you do this? It's a whole workshop that I have to learn now because, it's a new thing. And so somebody had set up Google Documents, and I just about got to know that. Now I've got Turbo Task, and who knows what will be this afternoon and tomorrow morning and so forth. So, I'm saying it in a joke, but imagine if somebody that has the access I have struggles with it. What does that mean for a rural woman? What does that mean? And are we ever talking and thinking about that? What we found is that even when we wanted to have strategies to reach rural women during COVID, digital illiteracy was high. Digital poverty was excruciatingly painful. People not having cell phones. They'll give you a cell phone number, but the cell phone number belongs to a neighbor or a family member or whatever. And these things had a profound effect on how women navigated the pandemic, and continues to be, because the rebuilding of services and so forth is very difficult for all of us. So I think Mrs. Suleiman spoke a lot about mental health and self-care. What we're finding now, as Masimanyane, is that the mental health aspects of the pandemic, coupled with the mental health issues that emanate from violence in our society. Now, all of us know about the women that were raped recently by 8 men, 10 men, and so forth. Now, that might be far away from us, but it certainly affects all of us, because you're thinking, how safe am I going anywhere? It limits us. This is what violence against women does, and that's why it is such an impediment to democracy, is because we become afraid to participate, to engage, to be out there, to put our lines on our bodies on the line because of the violence. And that violence is not external. That violence is internal. It's in our institutions. It's in our workspaces. It's in our families, our churches, our communities. We just have to read the news. It's so bad that some of us don't want to read the news anymore. And you open up your Facebook in the morning and there's a slew of messages about who's been killed. Look at those girls in KwaZulu-Natal, brutally hacked to death. It all impacts on us. Mandela said, until all women are free, no woman is free. No woman is free, because it can happen to you. And so democracy, which is a part of freedom, is impeded by the violence that we suffer all along. And then the other thing is, we don't have a culture of self-care. How do we care for ourselves? Masimanyane has a very highly sophisticated self-care program, because we started it from the beginning. We had some forward-thinking people in our organization that said to us, we have to do certain things. So as an organization, we have a full-time masseuse for the staff. Staff books a session, you get a 1-hour massage, you can have it anytime you like. We have psychologists, 2 psychologists that work with us, and they provide the debriefing, supervision, and individual sessions for people. We take our staff on retreats all the time because you can't just take in the sadness, the violence, the brutality without finding mechanisms to get rid of it. And then, to empty out so that you are free again to carry on the work. This week has been really hard for our organization, really, really hard, because of 3 specific incidents that we're dealing with. And, one of the other things we do is we pray every morning. We have devotions that helps us to deal with whatever it is that's coming in. This morning I set up a special group to pray around certain issues that we're facing. And we have interdenominational staff, so we address these things in a way that brings about equality and so forth. So those are some of the things that women generally are taught to give and not to get. So self-care and mental health are important components of how we are able to continue the work of helping and providing support in our society. Something else that's happened for us on a global level, so I'm linking now the work that we do nationally to international work, is our country is participating in the Generation Equality campaign of UN Women. This campaign has got 6 coalitions. You can see them there: gender-based violence, economic justice, bodily autonomy, and 3 others. I'm not even going to think of what they are now, that are really working to advance gender equality. But it helps us to link what we do to a global campaign. And that's all part of the democratic process. It's not about being insular, but about being able to open up space. What we find is that globally, multilateralism and the whole notion of working together and collaboratively is shutting down. People and countries are becoming very nationalistic, looking at their own issues, their own struggles, and then, letting everybody else, not supporting everybody else. So where we had a world where, we had donors that were thinking about supporting Masimanyane, supporting, Soul City, supporting all the other organizations, now they're saying, no, the money's got to stay in Europe, or it's got to stay in the United States. One of the rollbacks on democracy, if we're talking about global issues, is the way violence against women is being addressed. The United States, greatest democracy in the world, very questionable in my opinion, they're shutting down on women's rights with the reversal of the Roe versus Wade decision in America. And once a big power like that shuts down, it has a knock-off effect. Because they influence, and you know how they do this, it really frustrates me. If they're giving money to Ghana, they'll say, we'll give you this money, but you have to change the law on women's rights, this, that, and the other. So the PEPFAR grant that comes, or money that comes from the United States, is used as a tool to shut down democratic principles and to shut down the conversations that are allowed. They shut down education for women because they want women to have a very conservative kind of view. So that's how these global initiatives can impact on us. Russia repealed the law on domestic violence, allowing men to beat their wives. It's now in law. This morning we get the notice that Eswatini, the king, has said that men have to marry 5 wives or be jailed. I checked with our representative in Eswatini, and she said, look, it's not quite as drastic as that, but it is very conservative, and it does not allow for divorce. So no matter what women want to do, they can't, although the king has had 2 wives that have run away. But he is allowed to call those wives back through their families and so forth. And they're still expected to come and mourn him for 3 years if he dies. So that kind of rollback. In Turkey, we've seen that Erdogan there has also withdrawn from the Istanbul Convention. The Istanbul Convention was Europe's prime, it was like the Maputo protocol for us, a very powerful tool to address violence against women. What we're seeing is that young women in Africa are taking this fight for violence against women strongly, and they have a lot of successes. So in Tanzania, our partner there, Rebecca Gumi, she has litigated the state and won. We've seen recently in Zimbabwe that the young women, also one of our partners, has been active in the campaign to get the age of consent raised in Zimbabwe. And we see in Maputo and Uganda, the women fought because girls were not allowed to go back to school if they'd had children, and they won. So there is constant activism by women that allows for change to happen. And that's because of the democratic systems that operate. But I don't want to give the illusion that the democratic systems are robust in all of our countries, because even in our country we see rollbacks on that. And as women, we have to be very vigilant about how we address it. There was also this protest by young women in Johannesburg, which I thought was just the smartest thing ever, and I'm always in awe of what young women are doing, their bravery, their creativity, their courage. When the G7 meeting was held here, they went to the venue and held a protest and stopped the meeting, linking it, the discussion around economics, to violence against women. Brilliant stuff, brilliant. I don't know if we were that wise in our sort of heyday, but I suppose every generation has its own kind of measure of what is, brave and so forth. So talking again about Masimanyane, see if this works. You see, I'm technologically challenged, or your instruments are. I hope it's the instruments and not just me. We are a social justice and equality organization because we see gender-based violence as being just that, an issue of inequality and social justice. We are completely grounded in the human rights framework. So for us, we have to address the human rights of women and girl children. We have to think about the principles of equality and respect, which are basic to the human rights framework. And we talk about state accountability to ensure that those rights are fulfilled, that they are protected, that they are promoted, and so forth within our society. And still not enough is happening. It's a long process, but at least we have to be constantly knocking at the door to make that happen. I said we're locally rooted and globally connected. I've told you what we're doing in that concern. We do have community services and counseling and paralegal services. Now, the reason for that is through those services, we are able to gain an understanding of how women are enjoying democracy. How are they enjoying the actual provisions within the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and so forth? Because if a woman's coming and reporting rape, femicide, any kind of violation, it shows that there are gaps, there are opportunities for us to get better at that. Our work across Africa now is about promoting the leadership of young women. So we are a lot of intergenerational work. We've developed an intergenerational declaration on how this should work, because it's important that we don't hold space where younger women can come in and actually make the changes, because we see how powerful they really are. I've mentioned the footprints and the ways in which we work, which I think is very important. What is exciting for us is that through the Total Shutdown campaign, we asked for legislative reform, and that reform has taken place. We've reformed the legislation in the country. It's now, at the stage where it'll be implemented. We have the Declaration on Violence Against Women signed off by the President. So we still see that there are very powerful things happening, but the President has called for a second summit on gender-based violence. The first summit was a complete innovation, because no head of state has ever called for a conference, a summit on gender-based violence. We're having our second one. very contentious. I'm in those meetings, I'm part of the planning committee, because women are saying, we made these demands. There have been gains, but the implementation of those gains are still problematic. And some of it is because going through the democratic system within government takes a long time, has to go through, we were talking about it this morning, 9 different committees. You have to have a meeting with each of those committees. They then take that to their seniors, then it has to go to Treasury and so forth and so forth. And we're seeing that the blockages come more from the mindsets of people within those powerful positions. And it's again about what I said earlier on, how do we change those mindsets? How do we get people in positions of power to understand their responsibility to work at bringing about gender equality? That's the challenges we face. So I believe that the feminist movement, the women's rights movement, is firmly embedded in our democracy because we see it every day. Yes, there are negative, retrogressive forces that work alongside of the progressive movements. And it's those retrogressive, negative movements that we have to be influencing to show the significance of it. And those movements exist because of patriarchy. Patriarchy changes the mindsets of men and women. And if you're raised in a patriarchal society, it takes a lot to shake off the understanding of where women should be and what their status should be in society. So it's a big struggle. The use of social media is facilitating communication and creates sharper focus on issues, and it brings faster connections and so forth. So that's also an opportunity for the IEC to look at how can they reach women through social media to get this. And I think we as an organization during the COVID campaign pivoted our work, which is face-to-face work, and reached 28 million people by using radio and television campaigns. So those are very important to be able to, and community radio is becoming very, very important in people's lives now, because that's where they get information from. So, So I think that what I think needs to happen is that we need to put more effort into providing support to women at a very local level. It's no use saying we're reaching women when we're not actually at the rock face engaging with them. The other thing is to listen to them, to find out what it is that they see, what is the change they wish for and the change that they need to see in order for our democracy to really progress. In our regional meetings now, we're having conversations about our democratic systems because we realize that in all of the countries, there is a rollback on that. And there is a greater push towards nationalism and populist politics where you have one person around which everything hinges. And populist systems are not democratic. They don't allow the space for discussion, for dialogue, and for a collective resolution to the problems we have. So those are the kinds of things that I think, and women in particular, are left out because of violence against women. And I think that we have to think about how do we bring them into those spaces? How do we develop the agency of women to be able to stand up for themselves, make their own decisions around what they want to see and how they are going to get it? Because that vote, we still are more than 50% of the population in any country, particularly in ours. And we make a difference. Our vote makes a very big difference. We've got to talk about that. And in my organization, we work on violence against women, but when we are working in communities, we talk about the importance and the significance of women engaging in our democratic systems. So I'd like to leave that with us. I walk with a sense of optimism because of what I see young women doing, what I see women doing across the country. We can't be buried in doom and gloom. It is a dire situation, but the question is, how do we rise above that? We've risen above apartheid. That was said to us in Geneva by one of the CEDAW committee members. She said, if you have overcome a system as heinous and as difficult as apartheid, then sexism, you can overcome. I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Foster. Ladies and gentlemen, at the IEC, we can say with pride and without any fear of contradiction that we are an organization that truly believes in women. Currently, there are 9 provincial heads of elections, and 5 of them are women. Very strong, hopelessly opinionated women, yours truly included. Thank you very much, Dr. Foster, for those inspiring words. I love the name of this organization. I really love it because it points to action. Let us unite. Isn't that what it means? Let us unite. So from the terror and the violence of loss of dignity caused by natural disasters, resulting from our reaction to natural disasters, to a focus on gender-based violence and what women are doing through campaigns to overcome, to eradicate, and to deal directly with gender-based violence. We are now moving from the state of abstraction to the concrete. Think about this seminar today as a 3-part mountain. The part where we ascend to the peak and where we descend and think about what it is exactly that we're going to do when we get home from this. Deliberately, 5 presenters, 2 on the ascending side, 2 on the descending side, and 1 right at the summit, where it really is happening. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to bring a person who's going to take us to reality, to what it really is, to what it means to be. Those of you who are 10 years younger than me might have heard of William Shakespeare, and you might remember the question that he asked in one of his tragedies: to be or not to be. Sein oder sein nicht. To be or not to be. Now we are coming to a to be, to exist, to experience, to live, as we listen attentively to the next presenter. We call her on the program Supporting Input, the real deal, the summit, the peak of this mountain that we have ascended through the 2 presenters. And once we have listened to her, we're going to go downhill, slowly but steadily, thinking about what is it that we're going to do next. Thank you very much.
Molweni, igama lam ndinguNobuhle, surname ndinguRanaman. Ndilingqina lanamhlanje. Into eyenzeka kum, ndandina 15 iminyaka. Utata wayengasaphili ke by that time. Bese ndishiyeke nomama elona themba lam. But kwaye kwenzeka umama wakwazi ukuthi arrange umtshato nomfundisi nobishop ecaweni. Ezibana ndimncinci zange ndikwazi ukuzilwela okanye ukuphikisa ndithi andizuyenza lonto. But baye bayenza bayilungisa. Then ndanikwa ithuba loba mandihambe ndiye eGoli, emntwini endingamaziyo endingazange ndambona nangenye imini. Ubhuti endandiyiswe kuye wayendibonile yena kwii-pictures zasenkonzweni njengoba ndandikwi-Sunday school. Wandibona kwii-pictures, then kwa-arrange uba ndizawutshatela kuye. Ndihambile ndasingisa eGoli ndindodwa, umama zange andikhaphe. Ithe xa ndifika eGoli immediately ndigqiba ukwehlika eteksini, ootsotsi bafika bandithathela ifowuni. Baqala apho ubomi banzima. Ndazibuza uba inoba phambili apho endiya khona kuzoba njani. Ndihambile ndayofika apho ndandihambele khona. Luckily enough ndakwazi ukuthi mandikwazi ukuthi ndikreme inamba phone zabantu balapho ndandisiya khona. So ndaye ndabafowunela kanjalo ndabafumana ndayofika. Xa ndifika ndafikela kutata umfundisi of which yena ndandimazi kuba waye abekho ePasikeni xa kudibene iibhrentshi zonke. Xa ndifikele kutata umfundisi nenkosikazi yakhe nomntana wakhe enoba ndandimshiya nge-2 years or 3 years. Then kwenzeke ke kufika ixesha loba mandiyolala, ndihambe ndiyolaliswa endlini yalo tata owayezonditshata. Mind you, andimazi nobungakanani. But yathi xa ndibuza iminyaka yalo mntu wabekwa njengomntu omncinci. Ndifikile ke ndalala kwasekuseni. Yatsho inyoka emnyango. Wavula umntana lo kuba wayesazi. Angene utata omdala. Kubekho into ethi hayi inoba ngutata womfana endiziswe kuye. Kanti ndandiziqhatha ngoyena myeni wam. Ithe imini xa iqina kwafika oomama ababe bathathu. Lo wesithathu yayinkosikazi katata umfundisi lo. Bafika bendixelela uba bazondinxibisa. Ndibuza uba njani na ndingayazi mna loo nto. Kwathiwa kanti umama wakho njengoba bekekuthumela apha utheni, ngoba uthunyelwe apha kuba uzotshata. Namhlanje siyakunxibisa. Ndicela ufowunele umamam, kuthiwa andizumfowunela umama. Umama sekevumile. Ndaye ndanxityiswa kanjalo. Latshona ilanga kunzima kunjalo. Kwashiye kuba izoba ndim notata lo enditshatiselwe kuye. Kwaba nzima ukhulula ngoba ndandimoyika. Wayemdala. But waye wandinyanzela uba mandikhulule. Ndazikhulula impahla amadakhi lawo. Kwafika ixesha loba makulalwe. Waye wandilwisa efuna undilala inkani. Ngoba amandla ndandingenawo, yena wayenawo amandla ngaphezu kwam. Wakwazi ukuthi andikhulule, andilale nakanjani nangendlela wayefuna ngayo. Ndakhala but isikhalo sam wayengasiva. Ziqhubelekile iintsuku neenyanga, ndabona ukukhala kwam akuzundincedisa nganto. Ngoba lo mntu xa kayifuna le nto uyayifuna. Akathandisi mna. Abe nelizwi andixelela lona uba ungunkosikazi wam. Khona imini endaye ndamthuka ngayo ngoba ndasendikhathele. Wayendilala ubusuku nemini. Itshansi ayifumanayo wayezenzela. Waye wandixela efemelini, ndabizela ifemeli. Mind you ndiyi-1 kweli Goli, andinamthetheleli. Kukho yena nabazali bakhe nefemeli yakhe. Kuloo meeting ke yayibiziwe. Kwaye kwabuza unobangela uba yintoni uba ndingade ndibize intlamba emntwini omdala. Ndaye ndakhupha ilizwi elithi nam ndikhathele kukukhwelwa ngathi ndiyidonki. Abantu abangoomama endandilindele uba bandikhusele ngabo bavele bandinika icourage uba hayi nyamezela. Vele emtshatweni kuba njalo. Nomyeni wakho xa ungamniki le nto ayifunayo, akekho omnye umntu ozawumnika. Still ndandingakwazi ukuzithethela. Babe ndihlula ngamazwi. So ndandiye ndiyivume yonke into. Into ebuhlungu kuyo yonke loo nto, ndandingakwazi ukuthi ndihambe phandle, ndandigadisiwe. Kho imini endaye ndaphuma ndiyochitha amanzi, ndadibana nomfana wayiphethe ifowuni njengoba sasihlala emikhukhwini. Ndacela uba makandifowunise ukwenzela ndifowunele ekhaya. Yathi ndisacofa inamba, kwafika umntu ongubhuti endingamaziyo. Wafika walwisa lo mfana uba uyenza njani into ebunikise ngefowuni emfazini womntu. Kwakungemandanga. Mind you, isikole ndasiyeka kwa-grade 9. Ndayotshatiswa. KwakungoSeptemba. Unyaka wawusowuphela. Ndihleli eGoli. USeptember, October, November, December. Ndabuya ngoJanuwari. Nakhona ekubuyeni kwam zange ndibuyiswe ngumama, zange ndibuyiswe ngabo bantu endandiye kubo. Ndaye ndabonwa ngummelwane. Impilo endandiyiphila uba yayinjani na. Wandibhukhela itikiti loba ndibuye ekhaya. Ndagoduka. Still xa ndifika kumama, umama zange abe nayo laa nto uba njengoba ubuyile mntanam bekunjani apho ubukhoyo. Wayengakhathalelanga nokuba ndizawuphinda esikolweni noba ndizophinda na. Ndaye ndamcela uba ndicela ukuphinda esikolweni. Wavuma. But yathi izikolo zingekavulwa, ndasokoliswa impilo. Only to find out I'm pregnant. 4 months pregnant. Ndaye ndahlala kuba ndandingazi uba mandithini. Ebunyanisweni ifu ndandisazi uba isisu sasikhutshwa njani ngendasikhupha kwangelaa xesha. But ndandingazi uba mandithini. Ndifundile, ndabeleka ngoJuni. Abantu balapha endanditshatiselwe khona kho nomnye waye wavela. Ndahlala. Ndacingela uba ndizoba ngcono. Khange kube ngcono ebomini bam. Instead kwe kwabanzima. Sometimes ndandiye ndikhale ndikhumbula utata bekhoyo. Uba inoba yena uba wayekhona wayezokwazi ukundilwela. Ndimfundile ugrade 9 wam njengoba ndandimyeke phakathi. Ndibulela umama waye wakwazi ukumgcina umntwana. Ndaphindela esikolweni. Kodwa kwakungelulanga. Zange ndanalo uthando lwakhe. Ukhulile umntwana, nami ndabe ndiqhubeleka nemfundo yam. Andikwazanga ukumthanda. Ukufika kwami esikolweni e-high school, ndifike kutshaywa intsango. Ngoba ubomi bebungemandanga kum. Ndaye ndayitshaya nam. But yayithi xa ndiyitshaya ndiphinde ndikhumbule uba utata wayenamazwi wayesithi uzufunde mntanam. So ndifundile, ndampasa ugrade 12 wam. Ndaye etertiary. Yonke into ebendizenzela ngaphandle koncedo lukamama. Etertiary ndiye ndapasa nakhona ndafumana in-service training. Apho ndaye ndaya khona. The more ndikhulayo is the more iengi bikhula nayo. Bendinganothisi kuba bendihlala ezilalini. Ndaye ndanothiswa apha ndandiphangela khona. Bendibona uba ndine-anger issues. Baye bafuna ukwazi uba kwenzeka ntoni ngobomi bam. Ndaye ndachaza. Ndafunela uncedo kwa-social development. Ndizihambile ii-sessions zakwa-social development. Ndingatsho ndithi zindisebenzele. Because ndikwazile ukuthi ndiphinde ndimthande umntanam. Kunzima kunjalo. Una 11 years ngoku. Ndiqala ubonda naye last year ena 10 years uqala kwam ufumana uncedo. Ekufundeni kwami tertiary bekungekho mandi because yonke into bendizenzela. Kulapho ndabona khona ukuthi ndiyakwazi ukuzimela ebomini. Ngoku ndizohlulwa yintoni na ukuthi nalena ndiyinqobe igqithe. Ubomi abumanga mandi kangangokuba ukuthandana ndisakoyika. Umuntu ongutata ndiyamoyika, andimthembi. Inkonzo ndiyayizonda, andiyihambi. Ndayiyeka kusukela ngoko. Kuba kwakulapha ndandijonga uba ndizofumana uncedo khona, kodwa ndafumana ucindezelo. Ndilapha namhlanje because ndikwazile ukuthi ndihilishe. Kube lixesha elide, andikakahili ncam, but ndiyazama. One thing endiyifundile kwezi session ebendizihamba kuxolela. Umama bendingamxolelanga. Njoba ndaye ndafumana ichance xa ndifunda ugrade 12 uba ndihlale esikolweni. Ndaye ndabona uba kulapho kumandi khona uba okanye apho kuzoba khona lula uba ndisuke phambi kobuso bakhe. Umama bendimzonda. Bendisonqena nohlala apha ekhoyo. Kangangoba bendisonqena even ugoduka ndiye ekhaya. Ithe sendise-tertiary bendigoduka only ngoJuni xa kuvala izikolo. Ekhaya kukudanga nalapho bendifunda khona. But ngendlela ebendimonqena ngayo umama, bendingakwazi uhlala naye, bendingakwazi ujongana naye. Because bendinombuzo yi-one uba ngumama onjani ongakwazi ukuthi andibuze uba mntanam apho ndandikusekhona kwaye kwabanjani. Ndiyintombi ndimnye kuphela kuye. But isession endazihamba zindincedile kakhulu. Ndifundile uxolela, ndifundile uthanda. Umntanam ndiyamthanda. Akayompazamo. Ndibulele nokuthi ndikwazile ukuthi ndifumane in-service training because ngokokucinga kwam uba ndandingazange ndaqhubeleka nesikolo ndahlala emakhaya ndandingazolufumana uncedo. Imhlawumbi namhlanje ngendigizi yobisi. Imhlawumbi namhlanje ngendiyintombazana ehamba ilala esimokolweni elixhoba labafana. But ukuba uncedo ndiye ndalufumana ngokuthi ndibe kufutshane, ndasuka ezilalini ndaba sedolophini, utshintsho lube khona. Ndibulele nakwidemokhrasi because ngoku siyakwazi ukuthi siziripoti izinto ezinjengezi. Kudala kwakunzima uba maziripotwe. Ndingathi kwakulisiko ngoba yayithi umntu uba uhambile wayozekwa okanye wathwalwa, ithi xa ebuya kuthiwa phindela mntanam ngoba ingcwaba lakho lisemzini. Kumandi ngoku siyakwazi ukuripota, sifumane uncedo. Ndiyabulela.
Can we please give the lady a round of applause while I'm going to get a paraphrase. While we get somebody who's going to make a very brief translation of the testimony that we have had. Very brief translation of the testimony that we have had to cater for the diversity of our audience. As we do that, can we please give this brave, valiant young warrior a round of applause?
Thank you very much, Program Director. In trying to be brief and without quoting her verbatim, I would like to highlight just a few issues that she has mentioned for the benefit. This is a story, when I'm listening to it, that translates to a forced marriage, an organized forced marriage. That was done by the mother, in consultation with the church, arranged for the pastor, whom she trusted as a person that she can confide to. To be just brief, she went to Johannesburg after the marriage was arranged, where she experienced all the grief that she has outlined here today. Firstly, without even knowing the person that she was organized to get married to, a person who was same age as her father, if I'm listening correctly, whom she thought the person would be a protector, but seemingly it was a person who was arranged for her to get married to. Whilst she was in Johannesburg, without being told by her mother that she was going to go through this process, the mothers at church that she also thought were people that she can go and confide to whenever she experienced the challenges, were the very same mothers who encouraged her to endure and stay on in the relationship, although it was against her will. She is narrating the story that when she came back from Johannesburg after she was saved by a person who saw the whole abuse, who organized a bus ticket for her to come down back home, this is where she went back to her mother. When she got to her mother's place, without being asked by her mother how she managed to get back, or how she had stayed in Johannesburg, or whether the marriage that was arranged, the whole story, but she managed to ask her again if she can go back to school. At the time she was in grade 9. When she got back to school, she found other peers to be smoking dagga, and she joined in the dagga smoking. She went on to pass grade 12, and she went to a tertiary for in-service training. This is where she got all the help from the social development that was arranged, the sessions, counseling sessions that were arranged for her. And she is narrating a testimony today. If I can just go back to what Dr. Suleiman said earlier on. She mentioned all the abuses, the sexual abuse, the mental, the physical, the spiritual abuse, which led to her mistrust. And the violation of spiritual trust, which now she is narrating that she doesn't have confidence in the church, because that's one of the places where she thought if things were not going right, she would go and confide in the pastor who was heading the church. The violation of career development, the experience that she got and the abuse by fellow peers, by the community. She missed quite a lot in terms of opportunities to be a child because she fell pregnant at the early age. She also could have bonded with the child at the early months of birth, but that also was a missed opportunity. And she is testifying to the fact that the access and the exposure to organized counseling by the Department of Social, the counseling that she received there gave her enough strength for her to rise again and be the person that she wanted to be, and try and get as much opportunities as possible by educating herself again, where she got to the tertiary level. And she is also testifying to the fact that and acknowledging the help that she has received through the exposure of the democracy programs that are out there, because she is now able to report, she is now able to expose her story and tell it as it is. She is in the process of healing. One would not say it is final because she's able to translate, to narrate the story. She is in the process of healing. However, the early detection of that problem has assisted a great deal, because probably she would have been an addict, but through the programs that or the sessions rather, she was able to reverse, if I may put it that way, the whole idea of assuming that if I get to drugs, I would forget everything. I think that's the story, and thanks, Program Director.
Teteleli. Profound. Profound. We at the mountain peak. We're getting the story as is. We're writing her story as is. The rawness of the pain that comes from what used to be a voiceless sound to a powerful, valiant voice that speaks to us, with us, about us, on behalf of us all. I'm getting there in the, what revolution is this now? Gentlemen over there ready for something that will soothe us. We have heard about the betrayal of religion, so we're going to use something different from a hymn, because we're mindful of what the interpretation of religion can do to us, the damage that it can cause. Those of you who, as I said, are 15 years younger than I am and have read Shakespeare will remember the famous burial of Julius Caesar after he was betrayed by a very close friend of his. When Mark Antony, after creating the exposition by the famous Friends, Romans, and Countrymen monologue, then moves to the second part of that eulogy by showing the cloak that Caesar had when he was butchered by his friend. And he says, "Look, through this ran Cassius' dagger." And then he ends up by saying, "My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it comes back to me. My heart is in the resurrected, reincarnated, valiant warrior over there, and I'm going to pause for 3 minutes till it comes back to me while we listen to Bob James. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are about to start the descent of this 5-part mountain, and we're going to call on Dr. Eileen Carter from the Human Rights Commission to come and tell us about what is it that can be done now that we've been to the mountain peak. The Bill of Rights, as you know, in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act 108 of 1996, makes provision for the restoration of our dignity and the redress of the sins of apartheid. Dr. Carter, what does all this mean to us here today?
Good morning, everyone. This is such a privilege to speak at such an important event about something that is not only what I do professionally, but it's part of my energy. It's part of my vibration. Women's rights and how it translates into our democracy today. Whether it translates into our democracy today is what I'm basically going to get at, because we've heard this morning that policy vis-a-vis implementation is still one of our biggest challenges. But in order to know where we're going, we certainly need to know where we come from. And we've had the brilliant presentations this morning already about where South Africa has come from in terms of the feminist movement, but I want to take us back even more. And recently, I also addressed students on this issue because I want to re-emphasize how far we have come, but I'm going to try and bring home the concept of the more things change, the more they stay the same. So we're speaking a lot about gender-based violence, and we've had Dr. Foster also indicating the types of violence. It's not only a fist against the chin. It manifests on so many other levels. Now, I'll introduce to you the level which I want to speak about, but let's take it back and down to one of the most brutal forms of GBV, which is rape. And why I'm taking you back quite down in history and with the emphasis on his story is because rape was not necessarily seen as much of an issue centuries ago. In terms of the Code of Hammurabi, it's one of the oldest codified laws. Once a woman was raped, the man was persecuted along with the woman. She was raped, but she was also thrown into the river or dam. But she had an opportunity. Her husband could save her by pulling her hand out of the water. So her husband could say, okay, I will save this one. After she was raped, she was damaged. Didn't want to have her now. So that's the Code of Hammurabi, how they, it's one of the oldest laws and which they traced back and could find in terms of codification. In terms of the ancient Assyrians, a woman would be raped, and then her father or a family would be able to go and rape the person who raped her's family. So again, this was a male issue, you know. You rape my wife, I'll rape yours. In terms of looking at the Hebrew background, the woman was also stoned if she was raped, especially if it happened within the confines of the town. You know, it had big walls around. So if you were raped within the confines of the city, there's an assumption that you would have screamed and someone would have heard you. And if nobody heard you and that happened, obviously you were complicit. No? Does it sound familiar, though? When did you report the rape? These days, no? Did you tell anyone? No? No. So the more things change? So in terms of the Anglo-Saxon law, we're moving more towards, the damage. So in terms of the Anglo-Saxon position, if a person raped a woman, he could have been castrated. But not only him, all of his animals and livestock would be castrated as well. Okay? So that we're seeing a bit of retribution, we're moving towards. But I want to take you to the concept of raptus. And it's so, quoting Julius Caesar and going to the Roman law, it's very appropriate because the principle of raptus means that rape was recognized, but only adjacent to the property interest of the man. So you were persecuted because you damaged my property. The woman was his property. And that's why rape was seen as a crime. Not because of what it did to the woman, but what it did to the man. So I'm coming from a perspective of women's rights adjacent to the interest of men. So it's almost as if a manifestation almost comes to the fore only if it affects, I'm going to say, a third party. So the concept of raptus for me, just keep that in mind. property damage, because women were seen as property. Are seen as property? So the concept is also, if we link it to the principle of the paterfamilias, and I'm not sure whether you are aware of the paterfamilias. It was the head of the household which would own not only the women but the children as well. And I always link this with the story in terms of children's rights, an example of little Mary Ann, who was at the turn of the century, in New York, in an apartment building, and every day she was being abused. And nobody came to her help until a social worker or a lady of interest was able to hear her and wanted to report the abuse. But there were no laws to report the abuse of a child, because a child had no rights. Child was part of property, basically. Concept of paterfamilias. I own the woman, I own the children. So long story short, what they had to do is they had to classify little Mary Ann as a pet, because animals and pets had more rights than children. Children's rights, women's rights, adjacent to the interests of men. So, as much as the landscape has changed, it has not. And I want to bring you back into where we are here in East London, and we are very much aware of the Enyobeni tragedy, which occurred. And recently, as we committed ourselves, the Human Rights Commission went to the community, and we met with a specific school where children were affected by the tragedy. And one of the questions our advocacy officer asked, in order to get children, because Dr. Foster also indicated this morning that we need to speak about social ills, social cohesion, social change, bigger picture thinking. And one of the questions we asked was, have you ever been affected, yourself, your family members, your friends, community, by rape? And if you have been, the challenge was then to get up off your chair, and then it was all a game, and it was a lot of fun and interactive fun. And I must tell you that probably 70 to 80% of the children in that room stood up and participated. So it has affected us as a society, and it is affecting us as a society, GBV. And it is affecting our children as we speak. Why do I want to go from the GBV angle in terms of century-old laws? Because GBV is translating into a new form. Not the only form, but into an interesting form. And if we speak fourth industrial revolution and the challenges of technology, GBV is taking place online. And why is that important? I'll get to you, and why is it important for the IEC and us here today? So 80% of South Africans make use of the internet. Did you know that? 80%. More than 60% of them make use of it on their phones. So it's easy, you wake up, go on Facebook, check what's the news on Twitter. And South Africans love Facebook. I probably all of you have a Facebook profile. Is that not true? No. And I'm probably going to see all of these beautiful outfits posted on Facebook somewhere today. That's going to be true. So South Africans love Facebook. It's the most popular social media platform, along with YouTube. Not so much into Twitter, it seems. I think it's only about 2%. And Facebook, I think, yeah, it's high up there. But anyway, 46% of us make use of social media. So women are online. So the threats that we faced in person throughout centuries is now translating online. And that we are seeing in terms of so many different types of rights abuses. Because women are making use of these platforms. There's also been very useful research that has been done by NGOs. And it indicated that from a cohort of about 14,000 female respondents, 58% of them experienced online harassment. 50% indicated that they were more harassed online than they've ever experienced, walking down the street or in the mall. And 47% of them indicated that once they are online and they raise a feminist position or a women's rights position, they are harassed even more. So our women and our girls are online, but when they enter this platform, their rights are being abused. So I'm not sure whether you know how this is being done. Who's faced harassment online as a woman, as a man? Who's faced harassment? Or bad comments? Or what they call doxing. Do you know what is doxing? Now, doxing is if I don't like your view, or you irritate me, or I'm in a position of power and you are challenging me, I'm going to go see where you live. I'm going to go see what's your telephone number, and I'm going to publish it. So next time somebody hears or sees you, they're just going to contact your telephone number, and you're going to be harassed at home, or you're going to be harassed on the phone. So that's doxing, publishing your home address or your telephone details, your personal details, and having others then almost persecute you. So that's doxing. Now the other one would be cyber stalking. Somebody keeps on coming for you, incessantly so. And those are new forms of abuses. Now, we've come from centuries ago, and we are entering this fourth industrial revolution where women's rights are just being challenged all over. We're not getting a break. So, what is the effect of that? Research shows that women are simply just leaving these platforms. So you're being doxed, you're being harassed, you're being cyber-stalked, and then you just decide, well, I'm just going to delete my Facebook. I'm just going to delete my account. I'm just going to not engage on this platform anymore. And you know why is that problematic? The most important discussions currently are taking place online. The debates are taking place online. The political issues are being placed online. Views are being heard online. And we are silencing women. And they are not participating on these platforms anymore because of abuse. And that becomes problematic because the voices of women in democracy needs to be heard. And we are seeing when women rise to power, they are much more targeted than their male counterparts. You'll be targeted for what you're wearing today. Is your male counterpart being targeted for that? The only person I think was the previous minister, Tito Mboweni, who's being targeted for his shoes online. But usually it's women who are being targeted for their looks. You've picked up weight. What happened with your hair? So the retort would be to focus on women and then harass them to a point that women would leave the platforms and no longer participate in this very, very, very important mechanism of communication. So how do we move then to create platforms and environments that is conducive for participation for women? And that is a reality not only on this fictitious platform that takes place, we can't see it. It's a reality on the ground as well. It's a reality for us as employers, as parents, as friends, as family? Are you creating a platform for the women in your life to rise and participate in democracy? We're always talking about, women coming and taking their chairs in the C-suites, women in leadership positions. But have we created a conducive environment for women to do that? Do we ignore that they have 3 children at home? Do we ignore that when holidays come around, mothers usually need to put in place the measures for their kids to be taken care of? Do we ignore the fact when it's 5 o'clock and we're sitting in virtual meetings or at meetings in offices that somebody needs to go fetch that little person at school? Or do we just assume when women are in the working space that they ignore anything else? And that's the challenge we need to address, creating conducive environments for women to participate. I don't know whether you've ever heard about a working father. No, we speak about working mothers. We don't speak about working fathers. It's an assumption, male would work. But when a woman enters these platforms, it's a working mother. It's 2 different concepts. 2 jobs. Are we creating the conducive platforms? And why I'm linking that is opportunity is so important. If we are taking women away from platforms where they can actually raise their voice and we are harassing them to a point that they leave, then we're not creating those conducive environments. We are not positioning women to take up leadership positions. We are not giving them the opportunity to do so. There's this one data set that refers to income disparity. And then they look at a lot of countries to see, where is it the least, that disparity between what men earn and what women earn. In which country is it very, very little? Now, one of them is in one of the Scandinavian countries, but one of them is Rwanda, where the pay gap is, arguably small. And when they went and checked why that is the answer was the genocide. Men had to be killed for women to take up position. During the genocide, men were being killed. And literally vacancies were opening up. And women were pushed to the fore. And they are now seen as large parts of the leadership in the country. So isn't that sad? That for a pay gap to decrease, a genocide needed to take place. So the conducive environment that we need to create in this country is so important. And that includes the online platform. We need to encourage women to stay. Let's fight this fight together. Let's hear each other online and we support each other. The patriarchy, it was also earlier referred to as not only a fight against men, but also the women who participate in bringing other women down. I remember I was at a UN conference or an expert panel on harmful practices against children, where it was shared that FGM is practiced by the elderly women within the community, not the men. So it's the grannies that would hold down the young woman for the female genital mutilation. So we need to create allies between ourselves as women as well, to support each other, to amplify each other's voices, And when it comes to this online platform, not to dissipate into the background, but to come forward and take up space and start having discussions which would mean our inclusion on these very important platforms. Now, I've mentioned earlier that it's more women's rights adjacent to men's rights. Then it becomes something. No? How does it affect the men in the room? Then we can speak about, elevating the rights of the women. But I would say it's rather a third party. No? Is women's rights and their participation and the fact that they're being harassed online affecting big tech? Companies? Or should we wait for them to be only affected before they come forward and put in place measures to secure our participation and prevent human rights abuses online? So what can you do? What can you do? Now, we've indicated that on a policy level, on a legislation level, South Africa has lots to be proud of. Lots and lots. We are at the forefront in terms of the legislation that we have in terms of equality. Now, one such piece of legislation is the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. It's such a powerful tool, and we need to make use of it. Because if you are being harassed online based on what we call a prohibited ground, and gender would be, and sex would be a prohibited ground, you can go to the Equality Court. You can claim damages for harassment. There are certain mechanisms in place for you to make use of. But we spoke earlier about the preventative angle rather, than for women to have to go to court to vindicate their rights. But what I can tell you is that there are mechanisms. And the Human Rights Commission is one of the commissions and one of the organizations who can help you vindicate your rights. It's our constitutional obligation to provide redress and assist to provide redress when human rights have been violated. So if at a point that there's an opportunity for you to come and tell us about a rights violation, our doors are open. But my call to you is, let's not wait, with our hands in the air for someone to pull us from the water. Let's claim it. Let's claim our rights. And we vindicate ourselves and we join the platforms where the discussions are being held. And we make our voices heard. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carter. We are towards the end of the descent of the mountain, and I do apologize for you with 30 minutes behind schedule, but we will get there in time. These are very important matters that we needed to listen to. I'm now going to call upon Commissioner Octavia Ntuli Globata from the Commission for Gender Equality. Gender equality. Commissioner.
Dumelang, Molweni, Ninjani. Thank you very much. Program Director, thank you for the opportunity. The Executive and Administrative of the IEC, our like-minded organizations that are here, IEC, Human Rights, etc. To know more about us, go to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act number 108 of 1996, where they outline state institutions that are supporting constitutional democracy, that is us. And also let me acknowledge provincial managers from IEC, SAPS, and all the organizations that are here. and also recognize our provincial manager in the Eastern Cape, Umhlekazi Unceba, and the team from CGE that are here. From the executive point of view, we are proud as a commission, Nceba, for the leadership that you continue to give in the Eastern Cape, and also for the socio-economic work that you are doing with the other sister or like-minded organizations in the province, reaching out to communities. We appreciate that a lot. To know more about us as the Commission for Gender Equality, you go to the CGE Act number 39 of 1996, where it explains our constitutional mandate, which is to promote, protect, and respect for gender equality. It further outlines that we do our work through research, investigation, we do litigation, we do advocacy, policy analysis, we lobby. We also do amicus curiae as part of our work through our legal department, where we become friends of the courts as and when a need arises. I will touch on a number of topics as I make the presentation. I will start with the background on the Women's Charter, which is very important because part of the work that we do within the gender world was guided and spearheaded by the Women's Charter in 1954. And what is also important is that the decisions and the critical areas of concern that came out of the charter itself, the Women's Charter, we still continue to have those challenges today, and also they still remain the areas of importance and areas for implementation even today. So it shows how relevant all the articles that are there in the Women's Charter, they are very relevant for us. And they still call on us to implement, because what came out of the Women's Charter was a transformation journey that talks about gender equity leading to gender equality, which is the strategic route and where we would want to find ourselves as South Africans. And also the charter related also to the role of women as a whole, what is expected from us as women when it comes to these important issues. And the charter also sort of revoked the inclusion of women in everything that has to do with us. When you look at the imbalances that we have in our societies, women are leading there. When you talk of issues around abuses, we are leading there. When you talk about both the practical needs and the strategic needs, women are there. When you talk about poverty, we are the face of poverty as women. So the inclusion of women in this transformation agenda is of pivotal importance. Issues of socio-economic nature, there should be inclusion for us as women. We should adopt the stance of persons with disability, where they would say, nothing for us without us. And also when you talk about poverty, as I said, it's feminized poverty on its own. Feminized in the sense that the statement that I said earlier, where we say women are the face of poverty, is a feminized nature that is there as far as women are concerned. And also when you look at COVID-19 itself and how it affected us globally and how it affected us as a country in particular, it exposed inequalities, existing inequalities that are faced by women. I remember in 2020, I either wrote an opinion or an article about COVID-19, how it emphasized and exposed all the inequalities that we continue to talk about. And also during the COVID-19 era, even now, the issue of the burden of care, it was expected from us as women. Those that were sick, those that needed food, reaching out to communities, that burden of care was done by us women. And also we are not overlooking those great men, we know them, that took part in that area, those organizations that came forward and are still doing that as a moment. We continue to appreciate them a lot. So I've talked about the care work also, that was done by women. And if you notice, despite the work, the great work that was done, there were no incentives, there was no compensation. Most of it was done out of the goodness of women, because when I see women, I see very special people. No wonder creation made you the last bones of creation. It's because of the great work and the impact, whether it's social or economic or whatever, you do give in wholeheartedly and fully. I will summarize the issue of feminized poverty, just to quote some few things, that it is important to note that poverty is multidimensional and it includes economic, as indicated, social, cultural, and there are further demographic factors in that regard. And coming also to gender equity and gender equality, I always emphasize this, which is gender conceptualization is very important. When we talk about gender mainstreaming, you should understand exactly what is it that we are talking about and how to go about implement it, so that at the end of the day, we can get the desired and the expected results. Often enough, when you say, I'm a gender activist, I fight for women's rights, yet you don't understand the concepts that must assist you in doing your work, it also, that creates a challenge on its own. When you talk about gender equity, you must understand what, okay, this is the strategic route towards gender equity. This is where we address the imbalances. Okay, when you talk about gender equality, it's different from gender equity, because yeah, that is where we want to find ourselves. When we talk about transformation, we need to understand what is transformation. When we talk about gender transformation in particular, we need to understand. So a conceptual understanding helps us to now implement correctly, the knowledge and the understanding of what is required at that particular time. I would also advise Guti, we used to have the Millennium Goals in Sawa Kumbula, the 8 of them, but now says Nama SDGs. Let us put more energy to the SDGs. Let us also understand them, so that when we implement, we also know which areas within the SDGs that further needs our implementation. Let me quickly go back to the Women's Charter. I think there are other notes that I wrote somewhere with my hand. Okay, yeah, here are they. Just pardon me for a minute. Yeah, I was just outlining that there are articles there within the Women's Charter that you need to go deeper, read them, understand them, and implement them, because they will be able to assist us to bring the change that we desire. At the end of the day, there's Article 3. For an example, it talks about the inclusion of women into issues of the economy. It talks about the issues of access. We have Article 4, which talks about education and training. And we all know the importance of education and training, more especially the importance also of educating women. Educating women makes them powerful, makes them more independent. Because if you can check some of the abuses that we see in our societies, women remain in abusive relationships because there is lack of education to access certain opportunities. The issues of the economy also Ati, I will stay in this marriage because I need him to maintain me and the children. So the more we give more economic power, that's what the Women's Charter is emphasizing to women. That would assist in eliminating a lot of the social ills that we continue to see in our communities. We have also Article number 9, which talks about customs, culture, and religion. It outlines harmful cultural practices. It outlines the issues of female genital mutilation, which was a thematic area in the United Nations and an emerging thematic area at the same time. That's how serious and pivotal is the issue of female genital mutilation. It keeps on coming back when these engagements with the United of Nations, UNCSW, let me shorten it like that. And then the issue of virginity testing, we know the provinces where it's common. And sometimes you ask yourself a question, Guti, if this virginity testing is that important, why is it done on women, on young girls only? When is virginity testing going to be done on men? That would be very interesting. And when you look at the culture of Utwala, we know the background, how that culture started. But the way it's being implemented currently, it creates a serious challenge because others will abduct a young girl, rape the young girl, then after claim, no, implementing isiko logutwala. So one would be not at times and say why it's not the other way around. It's always men who implement that culture, and it causes a lot of abuse, a lot of humiliation. If you listen to people that has been exposed to it, you can't do anything except to cry, like we cried when the supporting input that was made. It took us back to all the challenges we continue to see on TV, social media. Yeah, we couldn't help it but to cry, but thank you very much. You are a young, brave woman, and the fact that you go out and educate other people about what you went through is admirable and honorable at the same time. I, for one, and I trust I can speak for everybody in the house, we were touched by what you said, and we have learned a lot from what you said. And based on what you were saying, the way you were emphasizing social development, kwenza sibone ukubaluleka kokuthi inhlangano enye nenye ayilandele imandate yabo ukuze sikhone ukusiza imiphakathi yethu. I-social development siyabona ukuthi yenzile umsebenzi wayo kahle kangakanani. I-Department of Health ayivele nayo benze i-mandate yabo. I-education yenza i-mandate yabo. Chapter 9 institution, human rights, CGE, and the other structures within the communities, the NGOs and the NPOs. Imagine if all of us are following our mandate to the latter and reaching out to our communities, ukuthi sizobona i-progress engakanani. Then there are issues also that we can talk about today, issues around employment equity, what is happening there when it comes to the advancement of women into leadership positions, the advancement of women into political leadership and senior management position. When we plan different organizations, they will come up with very beautiful, well-crafted employment equity plans. But at the end of the year, when it's time to give AMA reports, we don't see the desired results we are expecting. What is good in a plan that doesn't produce the expected results? When you check the equity targets, men are still in the majority when it comes to advancement into senior management positions, yet women constitute 78%, for an example, in the private sector. You go both in the private and public sector. Advancement of women into those top high positions remain a challenge. They'll just elevate one woman, then you'll see that woman on TV. What about the other women in those organizations? Women are not seen, women are not visible in senior management positions, yet women are well educated, well capable, hardworking and committed enough to deliver as expected, but it's not reflected every time there is an evaluation of equity targets, both in the private and public sector. As much as women also we are in the majority, check the political leadership, starting from political parties. Top positions are being given to men. As and when they decide, good, man, let's address this zebra approach or this equity approach, they'll put one or two women. It's not only happening with top leadership, you go even to the deployment into municipalities, into government. How many women do we have in the country that are DGs? It remains a challenge, yet we are in the majority. Those are the things that force us to go back to the Women's Charter, force us to go back to the Beijing Platform of Action, and both the regional and national strategic documents that tells us or educate us on what needs to be done. Let's work on the implementation. We are hailed as a country that has the best, one of the best legislations in the world, including our constitution. But when it comes to implementation, we lack a lot as a country. What is the use of a good legislation if it's not implemented? If it doesn't change the life and the status of people in general and women in particular? Let us close the gender gap. And no one will do it except us women. We need to claim the power. While I'm talking about this gender gap, it reminds me of something that was done by DPSA, where they introduced something that we call the Gender Equality Strategic Framework, which is a strategic tool for advancement of women to senior management position. It has clear targets, clear indicators, everything that needs to be done from A to Z. Actually, that document gives power to women to take positions within senior management, but women that are there on top, they tend to ignore this strategic document. When you check the compliance list by DPSA on something that we can lead as women to advance each other, the compliance list is an embarrassment. Then it reminds me, Uguti, how many women do we have? When we look at them, we could say, hey, oh, Charlotte Maxege. Remember what Charlotte Maxege did? When she was up there, she started pulling other women. She said, I can't be alone out there. Let us release a new breed, Yabo Charlotte Maxege. Abazothi naba there, especially those that are in the public service. But there's this document called the Gender Equality Strategic Framework. It gives me power as a senior manager, being a woman in my department, to make a difference, to make a change. It lies upon us as women to close the gender gap, including the pay gap, which I won't talk about because we talk about it a lot. You see it a lot, Google TV, even including what has happened recently. The Banyana made us proud. Then imagine, Baba Bongi ngamalini, umdlalo phela loyo. But the same victory, elethwe Banyana, If ilethwe ibafana bafana, things would have been different. Those are the things that we need to challenge. Those are the things that we need to correct. We look at the political representation, NCOP. It's questionable. I won't go into it. Trust that maybe part of the presentation will find their way to some of them, probably. Ne? It's possible. Yeah, for the sake of time, I won't go into it, but the presentation does cover woman NCOP, how many are we having? Women's representation in the NA, political representation as a whole, since the inception of democracy to date. We can do better as a community. As I close, I just want to share something very, very short and to the point. It's this example I would like to make. Ukuthi, in our line of work, it's a difficult type of work, and so is everybody's work. You will always come across challenges. But when you come across challenges, it's not expected of you to give up and say, no, kunzima, angisachubeki nale challenge. That's why you should push harder, soldier on. Imagine 100 meters, umuntu nakagijima 100 meters, ama hurdles angithi. When you come across a hurdle in a track, that is not an indication for you to stop running, but it's an indication that says you can learn to jump the hurdle and continue running at the same time. That is very much possible. Really, really closing right now. Go to our website, www.cge.org.za. Guna a lot of work that has been done by the Commission for Gender Equality, women in traditional councils. We know the leadership challenges that are there. It's there, you find such documents, Ugutwala. You also find the emergency report action plan on gender-based violence and femicide. We are doing a lot, and we continue to do a lot on gender-based violence and femicide. The fact that I didn't cover it in the presentation is because other speakers have already covered it. So go to our website, you will get a lot of documents there that can assist, because with the IRAP report, for an example, it outlines the problem, and it talks about targets, it talks about indicators. It's a solution-based document on gender-based violence and femicide. And also in our website, we recently launched what we call the SAPS report, where there were oversight visits that were done by commissioners with our teams in the 9 provinces, where we were visiting the different police stations to check compliance on a number of issues, including the victim-friendly rooms. When you go to that report there, SAPS, it outlines everything. It also gives the findings, and it also gives the recommendations. And also we are concerned, SAPS, as the Commission for Gender Equality, on the backlog on the DNA. And we are also concerned that some of the police stations, they don't even have the DNA kits, the D1s and the D7. How do you assist a gender-based violence victim if you don't have such things at your police stations? Your victim-friendly rooms, we have realized that they are more of a compliance. Some smell dust, some are dirty. You enter into them, you realize that they haven't been used for years. Those are the things that need to be corrected. SAPS, go to that report, it will assist because it raises issues and what needs to be done. Let me go. You know, a poet, naibona mic will end up performing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ntuli Butler. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the most important part now, our responses, our comments, our questions, our suggestions, particularly to the IEC. This is your time now. Gentlemen, you'll assist us with the mic, and Julie will assist me in identifying the first 5 participants who want to ask questions. I think Mrs. Suleiman is back with us, so let us please ask our questions. If we can try as much as possible to be straight and to the point, whether we making comments or asking questions or making suggestions to the IEC. Question time, response time, reaction time. Can I see by a show of hand who would like to contribute to the discussions? You fine? Oh, okay. Okay. Now, very many years ago when I was a teacher, I always said to my students, don't do this. Because if you do this, it's called self-effacing. Do this. So the teacher can see that you're confident in what you want to ask. We have a question over there. Mike, another question, another comment. The second one over here. 3 more. Okay, while they're asking questions, you'll think about your comments, your proposals, your suggestions to the IEC. I think the outreach unit in the IEC has its work cut out for it. Yep, over here, please. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think a few weeks back, a president had announced that we have cases of women, about around 100 and something of women who were raped, and only about 10 of those cases were brought into prosecution. Now, when questions like that are being brought, we have people asking, like, what are women doing? What should women do? And I think we need to do away with that mentality. Women should do nothing. Women should feel safe in the community without having to do anything. Secondly, there's something that's trending. That's called grooming. That's what men do and pedophiles do. They groom young children. I think it was 2021 last year, there was a case of an 8-year-old baby girl who was being raped by her father. Now, this is what men do. They groom younger children into liking what they're doing to them. It's abuse, but a child will grow to like that, and it's called grooming. So I think that we need to address those things. And pedophilia, in America, I think it was 2020, beginning of COVID-19, there were people who were suggesting that the consent age should be minimized to 2. And when I say 2, I mean 2 years. So they were actually suggesting that a child who's 2 years old should consent to sex, 2 years old. Those were pedophiles. And America, you can imagine America being one of the biggest states. These are the problems that we have in society. And in our rural areas, I suggest that we teach women of their rights, because we have women who still believe that physical abuse is a show of love. That if a man loves you, then it's a show that he loves you. I think also there's this thing that patriarchy has done. I call it divide and conquer. Especially in social media, they've made sure that the concept of feminism is being challenged so much that you have people defining feminism as a group of angry women who hate men. And we have women who genuinely believe that women are afraid now of being called feminists because they are seen or perceived to be angry women who hate men. And because of time, I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I will be very brief. First of all, I have comments, and right at the end, I have a question or two. I think that as women, we must understand that we are an integral part of our society because we are the majority in all the constituencies. Secondly, there are women movements who are always, who are not for women, but you'd find that they are posing as if they are women movements, because when you join the women organization, you always expect that they'll be advocating for women issues, but you'd find that there is a man here and there that, because you'll find that they use this as a tool to open up space for men to practice their own agendas. Number 3, I do not think that as women we have fully occupied the space of invention. For instance, if you do your research, you'd find that the things that are invented normally are credited to male species. I'm not saying that there are females who have not invented anything, but I'm saying the males are dominating in that field. It would be nice if we could give more women the 4th industrial revolutionary skills so that they could be able to sustain themselves. Also, I've got a question here. Or just one comment before a question. Also, when the Masimanyane was speaking, Manyane speaker was speaking, she mentioned that they are a globally connected organization. I wanted to find out if they also teach on the international rights, so that we can understand, because in my understanding is that the international rights basically influence whatever that is happening in our country, and you'd find that it is more or less oppressing us in that field. We still have women that in the working environment that still have lesser salaries as opposed to men, but you'd find that they are still in the same position of imisebenzi and all that jazz. I was wondering if you could open up platforms as well in the local, very, very local communities. If is it possible that people can reach out to you so that you can open those platforms for us. Lastly, you'd find that when we are talking about human rights, gender equality and all that, we have moved away from our feminine strength, because now we have to be masculine in the manner that sinama para asgcweleyo bethunana, they are really, you'd find that abona bantu that are in danger of crime and all that stuff, it's the women and don't. Now, can we have programs ezizawukwenza into okokubana zi-empowerishe women to be able to ukuzikhusela in these, whenever in these situations? Thank you very much.
Are you coming close? Thank you very much for the comments and questions, ladies. 10 of the best. Feminists being called angry and love-stuffed, I would say in Tyler Perry's words, it don't matter, it don't make no difference what they call you, it is what you answer to. And if somebody says, I'm angry, tell them you're not angry, you're mad as hell.
I think every woman in this country should be mad as hell if you look at all the rapes and the women being killed. There was a question around the gender-based violence, grooming, and feminism. I think anybody that has a concern for a woman, she is a feminist. If you put a woman at the center of your activism, you're a feminist. Men can't be feminist because they haven't lived the experience, but they can be pro-feminist. And that's a big difference. But I think the whole, Dr. Carter was talking about online violence a lot. And grooming is taking place a lot in online chat rooms and that kind of thing. Grooming is something that happens throughout all of our societies. And I think there is a need for us to address those issues, but we don't. Again, as I spoke earlier, it's so important for us to address social norms within our society, because with things like grooming, the whole family should be aware of what's going on and how that takes place. But we're not always vigilant. We think our children are protected within a family, but a lot of time they're not. So that's something we really have to be. And sometimes it's happening in the family, it happens in the church a lot. We were involved in one of these cases where the pastor had all these girls, that he was grooming. And the people bring more and more girls. We know that there are a couple of cases of that in the country. So we have to be very vigilant about that. I love the affirmation that women are integral to our society, because they absolutely are making up the largest number of it. And we should not be fighting for space. We should just have space. But that's not, there are forces, patriarchal forces, that keep us out, that exclude us, that invisibilize us. And so that we need to be aware of and be fighting for them. There's this whole debate about, I'm a gender activist, but I'm not a feminist. A lot of people have that kind of thing. We do know that a lot of movements that call themselves women's rights movements or feminist movements are not. And they're not when they uphold patriarchal ideologies and they refute the equality of women within those societies. And you've also mentioned the fact that opportunistic men, not all men, use those spaces to control women. But, sometimes we go into these very big meetings where there are elections, and just recently, earlier this year, this happened, and women happily nominated a man to be the head of the gender forum. Women, not men. So that's how patriarchy works against us. And it was because he could speak well and say but we have women that can do that as well, but we will collude in the patriarchal, projects of controlling women. Agree with the notion, because I said it earlier, we don't want to train women at survivalist jobs. We want women to take full positions in the economy. And women are afraid of that. We are taught that, you can't do this, you're not good for business, the not-nots are not true. Women can do anything they want. We've seen some of the most powerful women in our country in the liberation struggle taking up positions, holding those positions and fighting, to keep them. And there's so many in our country, Tinjuem Tinso, Mavivi Mayakiyaka Manzini. I'm just thinking of some of them, Ruby Marks, Briggs Govender. All of these women have taken up that fight. The earlier women, Ruth First, Mrs. De Bruyn, all these people have really fought hard, a lot of the women now. So we do know that they can really do a lot of work for us. There was a question to Masimanyane specifically around being globally connected. We have within Masimanyane the International Network to End Violence Against Women. It consists of groups from the South only. We only work with Southern groups. So I'm talking about Asia, and India is a big partner there. I'm talking about the International Indigenous Women's Groups, all from the South. We have African women in the diaspora in Australia and the Maori women in New Zealand and the Pacific, South America. Our secretariat is Venezuelan. And so all of these women are working in the human rights field, and they help to set the standards. So what's important about international human rights is it sets the standards, like the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, that is used by countries to develop their legislation, because they have to domesticate. It means the international framework is there, but we bring it in and we'll make it legislation in our own countries to guide us. So these women are at the forefront of the fight for equality. They started a women's rights movement because women's rights were subsumed under human rights, and they were like, no, it's very different. Because if you talk about human rights, you don't take in the disparity that exists between men and women globally. So that's been very important. It's won us things like the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It's made other institutions like the International Labour Organization come up with legal frameworks like Convention 190 now, which talks about sexual harassment in the workplace. All of those things guide us, and it's important for us to use. As Masimanyane, we produced the first NGO shadow report that spoke about how women were actually experiencing the changes in South Africa. That was done in 1998. We did a second one in 2010 because that helped us to look at what's actually, how we measure against the international norms and standards. In the 17th of March last year, 2021, yes, the United Nations released a report on South Africa that Masimanyane contributed to. We hosted them when they came here to look into which human rights violations are being violated when women are subjected to domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, and so forth. And that has highlighted all of the human rights violations within the international standards. Do we do this at the local level? Over there you've got Xoli and Sibongile. They are the people who work at the Rockface. We have teams that go out into the rural communities. We're working in the 6 districts and 2 metros of the Eastern Cape. Boiswa Mahambi runs a program for the provincial program that's looking at embedding the National Strategic Plan into all district and local governments. And then we have women that go and train the women on the international human, because I always argue when I'm in those spaces, the international spaces, if it doesn't change the life of a woman in the furthest village, it means nothing. So that's the commitment we have, is to be able to actually localize, besides domesticating, localize the international instruments to change the lives. And we have beautiful stories about how women have used this to argue for housing through the RDP program, to argue for bridges being built, to argue for Vula Ladonga in Iduchwa, asked for a clinic and got it. So women use these tools to be able to further and advance their positions in the communities, but also to enhance the protection for women. I think that's all. Did I leave anything out?
Thank you. No, that's fine.
Okay, great.
Yes, thank you. I think I will respond to a question that was raised earlier about issues of gender-based violence in women. One problem that we do as women, we don't speak out. It's very important that we should speak out and report these cases. And when we report them to SAPS, to make sure that we experience the full benefit of our criminal justice system, report everything correctly. That will assist the investigation for SAPS. And once SAPS has done a good investigation based on what you have given them, it assists the prosecution, etc., etc. And also communities, there was that slogan that you say, don't look away, act against abuse. Do you still remember it? It's still relevant even today. Do the good thing that the neighbor did in saving that young person. Report these cases, speak out also as a community. Then with the CGE, we have 9 offices, Guma provinces, wonke, and then we have programs that we do that are generic in all the 9 provinces, but also there are specific programs that we do that are specific to each particular province based on the challenges that are there. Make good use of our offices. We have capable officials that are ready to work. We do our legal clinics where we go out to communities and educate them on a variety of on issue of equal pay for equal work, pay gap, the Commission for Gender Equality. It's an ongoing work and ongoing progress for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. As we are getting ready for the PO to come and do the closing remarks, are there any more comments, suggestions? 1 over there, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 6. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Remember, we do this in confidence, right? You don't do this because I'm short, I can't see you. You do this, okay? You know what we say when we want to say we're going to be brief. We say, I'm going to be short. Okay, now you can't cut your length. One was over there, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, our comments are going to be brief, not short, right? Brief. As we getting ready for the PO to address us. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Palela from Masimanyane. It's a comment and I think we need to look into going to rural villages more because they tend to get ignored. And as Mas Manyani also do prevention, I'm part of the prevention program. And I realized that when we go to the villages, women are very eager and excited to work with us. And actually they're very welcoming to our services. So I think we need to go more to the rural villages and also while targeting traditional leaders because they're a very difficult crowd to work with. They're very difficult. At the same time, why I'm saying they're very difficult because when we sometimes meet with them, some of them who still believe that ukutwala is not wrong. And when we are talking about ukutwala, we are not looking at Mntwana Ntombazana being taken away from her home, but we look at rape. They get raped because most of the times they are even younger than 16 years. And then they have to drop out of school. That's another thing. And then when we are talking about women dropping out of school, then that means more women being, I would say, illiterate, then less access to job opportunities, and then they become dependent to their partners, which makes them susceptible to violence again. So I think we need to do more work in the rural villages. Thank you. Oh, again, sorry. Last week I was in the provincial gender machinery meeting and Uputnaba was doing a presentation. And I would like to thank CGE for the work that they're doing. Because he did a presentation on Ezingolweni. I think that's where there were a series of killings done on women, or they were happening mostly during the grant week, where women were targeted for their money. And then, so he did a lot of reports on that, and I appreciate that work, and I appreciate the work that you're doing in the communities as well. Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you so much. I'm Nombuyiselo Nkuzo. I'm from PEDI, running an organization about the human rights and also serving on the moral regeneration movement. I just want to say, having listened to all the presentations and the speakers, I'm coming out of this gathering saying that there is really still a lot to be done. For instance, I'm looking at what was said about all the legislations, the good ones that we have, but still there seems to be rife things happening in our communities, which I believe then it needs us to go back. It's not a question, but it's a comment saying that I'm coming out of this room saying that a need for a parabola model is there, which is nothing other than just saying that not all is lost. With us getting out and check where we've left one of the steps and try and go and connect it, we'll be in a position to attend to the challenges that are facing our people. Also, I'm having what is called the cottage meeting. Nowadays, it's not easy to get a lot of people gathered in one room, but at least having to come across a few of them, you'll be able to make sure that you assist those people, because our people need information. Look at the issue of saying that we do have a lot of legislations. We are still on the ground approached by people like educators who still want to administer corporal punishment. It's a situation that is not changing, but with us from this room, I think if we go back with all the information that we've got here, with all the advices we obtain from this gathering, we'll be in a position to go and assist. I was also so happy when some of the speakers mentioned the use, the good use of the SDGs, especially the 17th one. To me, it means that if we feel that we cannot do this alone, at least we need to go and partner with other people to ensure that the right thing is happening to our communities. So I'm of the opinion that if we go out and reach out to the people, our people who at times we look at them as being ignorant, but at the same time, if we consider that they need to have the information that we have, we'll be in a position to help them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The lady next to you. lady behind, oh, was here number 3. We can give to, yeah. Go ahead, and if you move the mic over here to the people, please.
Enkosi. Xa ndizawuthetha andikwazi uthetha njengomama ndingakhange ndithi wathinta abafazi. Wathinta abafazi. Wathinta imbokotho. Eke ndizawubaleka ndizuma kakhulu. Futhi ndifuna ukuthetha ndiyacela sibe ngathi siseParlamente kubekho abantu ababhalayo nabazawuyikhuphela. Okukokwam ndijongile kule province yethu yalapha eEastern Cape ukuba ngaba xa kusenziwa lento kuthiwa luhlahlo lwabiwo mali, zonke ii-departments ezilapha esijonge ukuba kwezi programs kufuneke zenziwe kule province zonke ziyathanda uba no-zero nto. Zinikwa imali encinci xa ujonga eGauteng ujonge eKapa. Nto ke leyo eyenza into yoba masisilele amathuba amaninzi ukuzenza izinto. Sisebenzisa kakhulu laa nto kuthiwa abantu mabavolontiye. Ndilelinye nam lamavolontiya amakhulu, noba ungayi kwa-SAPS ndiyavolontiya, noba uya kwa-social development ndiyavolontiya, community safety ndiyavolontiya, ngoba eyona ndifunekayo ukuze kubonakala utshintsho ngabantu abapha ezinyaweni kule ndawo kanye inzima apho kubulalekwa khona zihambe izinto ziyoma eParlamente, kodwa ukuze sizibone ziba sezinyaweni ukuze sinyuke nazo. Okukokwam namhlanje kukuthi ndiyacela ke ijongwe i-Eastern Cape. Yintoni le nto isoloko ifumana ibhajethi encinci? Zonke iindawo zakwa-social zalapha Eastern Cape azifumani mali yaneleyo. Enkosi.
Thank you, Manager. Then we'll give to the 2 ladies at the back. Let number 3 go first. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. T. Greetings to the panelists and to my colleagues, everybody in the room. If I may just paraphrase what my sister there is saying for the benefit of those who couldn't hear her. She is complaining that the Eastern Cape always gets a small share of the budget. And so much so that people are now being encouraged to do volunteer work because there's no money to pay stipends. For my comment, I want to start by remembering the late Reverend Desmond Tutu when he said that politics are far too important to leave to politicians alone. And I want to submit that women's issues are far too important to leave to women alone. And as such, I want to say big up to all the men that are in this room and those who are connecting elsewhere, because we need to be seen to be supporting endeavors such as this. Coming straight to a comment or one of the statements that was favored by Mrs. Suleiman, I think, when she said that for the IEC, after towards the end of her presentation, she was saying that for the IEC, the IEC must do advocacy. That's what she was saying. She was actually suggesting that we must do advocacy on housing in particular. I feel that I must stand up and not leave that hanging, because somebody else among the presenters was saying, and I liked that each and every one of us must follow our mandates. Now, it is not within the purview of the IEC to have any inputs on housing and where people are settled, but ours is to find ways of accessing those communities by doing outreach and voter education and actually availing voting or looking for and providing voting stations for those people who reside there. we have realized along the way that when new settlements are being built up by either municipality or government, we find that there are no community amenities that are provided. So we, in our small way, try to influence that. But the challenge is that we do not know at planning stage. So we find that there's this big settlement here, but where you can find no church, no community hall, no school for that matter, where we can, prepare a voting station for our people. I just wanted to talk about that whilst it is important that housing must be provided for, but the IEC has limited access to how that can be sorted. Lastly, Dr. T, I wish that forced marriages could be outlawed, period. Because whatever reasons you can put forward or justification, for me, that practice carries the ingredients of rape. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're happy that there must be politicians in our midst, so you take in that, including the budget for the Eastern Cape. Your responsibility will be to change the legislation on forced marriages, so you can answer the questions about what is the difference between forced and arranged, what is cultural and what is unlawful. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. And Dingunosipho Wagwam Dedekyan. I'm from the Department of Education in Buffalo City. My first comment or suggestion would be for the IEC to abuse the memorandum of understanding that is already in place between the IEC and the Department of Education. Abuse it in that within the outreach programs that the IEC has, not only focus on the youth in general, but rather have a program that specifically focuses on the girl children in our schools, which would then, it would assist and enlighten and empower the girl children as they grow up. We as adults already, we know about GBV and everything else. But those young kids who were victims of the Enyobeni Tavern and all other, forms of abuse, alcohol, finances, everything as they grow up, forced marriages, it would assist us as a sector, as education to, try and eliminate those forms. And in that, the IEC could partner with organizations like Masimanyane in having a standing program that focuses on girl children in particular. The second one would go to Masimanyane. I'm partly covered by the previous speakers about I picked up that you do have outreach programs that go into the communities, but my wish would be for you to, when you go into those areas, like the rural areas, when you leave them, I don't know how you do it, but maybe if you could leave them in an organized, leave them being organized as women, so that they, whilst you are gone, they can be able then to remain being organized, have their own smaller organizations, where you would then provide them with support from time to time, so that they can also be, carry on after you've left, and not leave them on the leeway and not knowing what to do next when you are gone, because you will be focusing on other things. So those would be my contributions. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Program Director. I'm Nomfanelo Makam from Social Development. Listening to all the speakers here, it has become glaring that as women, we have not reached that level of rallying around one another and supporting one another. I always say that we have got so much power as women to change the way the girl and the boy children are treated there at home. We need to change our child rearing practices when we bring up our girls and boys there at home at a very most, the level of socialization, because that's where things get wrong. So I would like to suggest that. And then again, we've talked about the departments and the organizations working in silos. And if we work in silos, we cannot bring about any significant change. Yes, we can be working together there on the ground as these departments, but it needs to start at a planning and strategic planning level so that we plan together and allocate a budget for critical programs on the ground. Thank you.
Here, and that'll be the last comment and proposal. Fortunately, there are no questions, and then we will allow the provincial head to address us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bongiswa. I'm from Soul City. I'd like to give a comment to Masimanyane or a suggestion. We as Soul City, we advocate for young people to learn to be independent. So since we are all operating in the local regions, we're having a problem recently that we young women, what we do is, since we are receiving social grant for our children, what happens in the rural areas, whenever it is the payday, what they usually do, they go to town, they buy alcohol and forget about their children. So I think now, if we all partner together so that we teach these young children, these young ladies, that we should also be part of our children's lives, so that at the end of the day, they also making them aware that they also do matter. Because what happens now, when IEC goes to the Eastern Cape in the local regions, what we know is that it's about voting. They want our votes, they want to register us. How about when we partner together, we learn that, okay, we advocate for these young people, we are the voice of the voiceless, so that at the end of the day, you bring interest to us young women that, you know what, it's not only about voting, it's not about registering us, it's also about empowering the young women. Thank you very much.
In educating those who are not educated, because it's not everybody, by the way, who abuses the grant. Because remember, sometimes the grant is received by the grandmother in lieu of the child, so you've got your work cut out for you, ma'am. We are now going to almost at the end of our 5-part, 5 chapter book on the history that we're writing today, but we're going to listen to the provincial head and see whether or not she will give us refreshments after this. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember, there is no testimony without a test. Over to you, provincial head.
Yeah, you've always been shorter than me. Can you see how short? Because I don't want us to have this discussion again. All right, it's the heels, that's what she's saying. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm not sure whether, I'm not sure how am I feeling, whether I'm excited or I'm most saddened by what has been discussed here. It's a mixed emotion. But I'm happy that this has happened. We'll continue to talk about our issues. But what is more important is to see a change, is to see things happening when we have actually discussed things ezisidlayo as abantu abangomama. As a province, we've actually engaged women across the 8 districts, the 6 districts and the 2 metros. And I happen to be part of the one that was in Alfrenzo, Ematatiela. And amongst the delegates, there were 5 survivors of Uguthwalwa. And Umsutu, thank you sis for coming here. She was one of those 5 women. And amongst the 5, there was one that was an elder, I would say. She looked even older than myself. And she related her story and she could not finish, she cried. It's something that happened over 30 years ago, but she still cries when she talks about it. She is crying because she's different from the other younger ones who have since had an opportunity to get assistance, especially social development. Even on the day social development mem was there, and they said they request that they be given time to actually talk to them before they come to the podium and also talk to them after they've shared their experiences with us. What you have done it for so many young women out there. Not necessarily for people that have gone through what you have gone through, but abantu bane battles zabo, abantu have experienced a lot that might be as painful or closer to what you experienced. But when young people stand up and share openly what they've gone through and to say, most importantly, I'm surviving, it's still a struggle, but I'm achieving, I'm being educated, I'm educating myself, I now love my child. You are speaking for millions of women that are going through hardships. And we are praying that you carry on having that strength of sharing your experience, because it's a healing for yourself and you are healing so many young women out there. I'm happy that my manager has made it clear that we are having mandates as different institutions. I did not want, even at the time that we actually opened these platforms in the various districts, to be seen as an IEC that has powers, to handle the survivors of forced marriages, to handle human rights and whatever. No. That is why we actually invite the various institutions that have powers and mandates to deal with the various issues that we have dealt with today, so that the relevant institutions can actually be of assistance and actually, most importantly, share what they do, so that we can be able to be informed and go back to our own communities and share the information that we have received today. We'll continue to do these discussions. What I want to discourage is us as women talking about our issues only in August. For some reason, it's as if our voices are taken away from us between September to the next August. Let's talk about a particular issue every month. When we meet in August, we look at all these issues and take stock as to what is it that has happened while we raise these issues on a monthly basis. I said this in Matatiela, and I said it very excited with the fact that there was justice, there was NPA, there was social development, there was SAPS, there was this, and there were all these institutions that have power to actually do something when a child comes up front to say, I've been raped. Social development, it's so vivid. What they do, the work that they do, we can see what is happening. There was a group of women from traditional leadership she stood up and she said, I am standing up and saying to you all that I am so ashamed of having known all over the years that these things are happening, and we are not doing anything as women that are married to the traditional leaders. These things are happening in our own villages. So let's live here feeling proud by the fact that we are part of women that are in leadership, but that will do something about what was shared. It's useless to talk and not do anything about what you know happening around you. I want to stop there and to do what I'm asked to do. Firstly, let me thank our speakers. Thank you very much. I know you're very busy. This is a very busy month because our voices are taken away from us the whole year and we only speak in August, which is something that we need to change. Dr. Foster, I'm sure we'll be knocking, Jules, we'll be knocking on your doors. We will be knocking because what is said here, it's very true in that we are fortunate as Chapter 9, as one of the Chapter 9 institutions that is having an office, an IEC office in all the municipalities, but not all other institutions are like that. But how best can we assist each other in ensuring that even we give you space in our own offices, once a year, it's known that human rights colleagues, human rights personnel will be in the IEC office from 8 to 5 on a particular day in certain municipalities. Why don't we do that? Let's work on that so that they know that, okay, once a month, all the Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 institutions, they're actually targeting districts. On Wednesdays, they're in Alfredo and whatever. Let's do that. We've started, actually, Commissioner, Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 institutions. We had a meeting in my office, and we said, let's assist each other. Let's not do our work because there are no resources. The little that we have, let's see how best can we work. I have offices all over the province. Why can't you work from our own space to ensure that you assist our people? Mr. Suleiman, thanks so much for your input. Dr. Foster, Dr. Carter, Commissioner Ntuli, siyabulela kakhulu sisi for coming to this side. Thank you for raising your hand when you were asked by your CEO, your chairperson, to actually come to our province. Dr. T, this is the Provincial Electoral Officer for the Northwest. She's very passionate about women issues and education. And she happens to be a friend. When I joined them as women PEOs, she was already a PEO, and she grooms me in a way, in so many ways. She's not aware. I look and I learn, and I love her to bits. She says it as it is. She doesn't hide, and she inspires a lot of young women in the institution. Thank you to the different departments, SAPS. We are nothing without you on election day. When Amampondo close all roads and we can't move, you never fail us. Department of Education, 90% of our stations are schools. The day you say we are no longer working with the IEC, there can never be any voting. And we are grateful when we meet in a non-election period. Amongst us, I invited leaders coming from the religious sector. I invited them because they need to know what is happening around them. And I invited because I knew that Umsut will be talking about how she got her experience. It was not from the family, it was from the church. I'm not saying much, let me stop there. Lastly, I want to say thank you to my colleagues. They are all from the 8 districts, the 2 metros, and the 6 districts. We've done this on a bigger stage. We need to go back and do it continuously so in our small stages in the rural villages. And we'll be not calling people to town. We'll choose a certain village and go and talk to Abamam. And maybe at times not without even chairs for that matter, just to sit around or under a tree and discuss women issues. You know, enzele basingafike sichophisile and even scare them because we're looking superior, and try and blend in so that they can be open to us. That is how you win people's hearts, so that people can be open and talk exactly how they feel about the issues that happen. I'm told that there are villages around Tabankulu and Flagstaff where the male leaders, they're actually saying it's strange that there are people that find ukutwala wrong, because they are actually reducing teenage pregnancy. When they arrange these forced marriages, they're actually assisting these girls, because anyway they're gonna fall pregnant. But now they find them husbands, they get pregnant, emzini, ikhaya lentombazana liphi anyway, lisemzini. So we still have a long way to go. It's not gonna be easy. It can never be a matter of presentations and those people that believe that it's right, they change like that. It will not be easy. Lastly, I would like to thank, before I go to Ujuli, I would like to thank the National Office. Where is Dr. Rapol? Is he gone? Okay. Let me thank him, even if he's not here, for his support financially. Jules, we need to thank you got money from you. I didn't have money for this. Lastly, Jules, if you can stand. That is Julie Stanworth. That is the organizer of these beautiful sessions that are now becoming a standing feature in the Eastern Cape. You are making us look good, Jules. Thank you so much. I heard Dr. T saying these good things about me when she opened. I was like smiling, knowing that, hey, good Julia's. Thank you very much, Jules, and don't think that your work is going unnoticed. We are really proud to have somebody that is so energetic. Whatever you do, Julie is energetic about anything. Even if you are mad about your own issue, she will take upon itself to cool you down. That is the kind of a person she is. She's just a mother in that office. And we are really grateful that you carry on, to do this. We'll carry on talking about issues, even if they are not voting issues. Anyway, the majority of my voters in this province are women. So into Thank you very much. Let me invite you to lunch. There is some lunch that has been prepared. But before we do that, let's thank our speakers officially so. Oh, you're here. I'm looking for you. Let me start with Dr. T.
Oh, I do have
just a token of appreciation for you to leave that small province of yours and come to this huge province of mine. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. T.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Msut, see, this is for you, Mtana. Can you please give a round of applause? Dr. T, over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, PEO, for the acknowledgement and for the invitation. As she has already stated, my province is not as small as she says, it's the Sun City. My part of the world is at the foot of the Kalahari desert, and I woke up this morning to the glittering, calm sea in the Eastern Cape. Thank you very much for that change of scene. It really does a lot to my spirit. And I would also like to thank the gentleman over there for being on point, particularly with that In the Garden Bob James track. If you look at that album, is a very smooth, the track in particular. And, you know, the garden it's getting together piece by piece, and I think that is where we're going. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a historic day of even numbers, except for the Pentagon, the 5. Now, the African saying goes like this: if lions do not write their own tales, the story will always glorify the hunter. Ladies, we are writing our story today, and we should continue to do so. Thank you very much for your indulgence.